All right, thanks very much, Chris. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, which hopefully is most of you at this point, my name is Scott Moore. I have a dual privilege this afternoon. First of all, to welcome you all and really to thank you all for all the work that you do to support Penn's global engagement, and we really look forward to working with you all to do even more in the months and years ahead. I'm also privileged to be able to introduce today our Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, Dr. Zeke Emanuel. In addition to being Penn's Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, Dr. Emanuel is the Levy University Professor as well as the Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor with appointments in the Perelman School of Medicine as well as the Wharton School. In addition to those appointments, Dr. Emanuel is co-director of the Health Transformation Institute in the Perelman School, as well as chair of the Department of Medical Ethics and Health Policy, also in the medical school. In addition to that, as many of us have seen, especially over the last 2 years, Dr. Emanuel is a very prominent public intellectual and commentator in the fields of public health and healthcare, including being a contributing columnist for the New York Times. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zeke Emanuel.
Thank you very much, Scott. It's a little over 10 years ago when I arrived at Penn and assumed a new job. There hadn't been a vice provost for global initiatives, but I did inherit a fledgling thing called the Global Engagement Fund. It was tiny, it was unfocused, and there was no strategic plan behind it. And I can safely say 10 years has made a huge difference. First, we have 4 global engagement funds. The original Global Engagement Fund, which covered the whole globe. We had a China Engagement and Research Fund focused on China when we opened the Penn Wharton China Center. We then had one for India, and most recently, because of a generous award from Wendy Holman and her husband Wayne, a Holman Research and Engagement Fund focused on Africa. Things have grown, but importantly, they have also come together in interesting ways. That's sort of been the growth of the engagement funds, and 10 years has made a huge difference also, obviously, in the world. When we arrived, globalization was all the rage. We were doing it. Everyone was in it. What a difference, right? Beijing is on lockdown or about to be on lockdown. Shanghai is on lockdown, and it's, we were 10 years ago or a little less, putting the final touches on the Penn Wharton China Center there. Amy and I were there, and it was still under construction, and everything was being finalized for a grand opening symposium. You're not going to China, and it's unclear when we are going to go to China ever. The idea of war in Europe was the furthest thing from anyone's mind. Almost no one was training in Russian, thinking about Russian studies and Russian security issues. What a difference 10 years has made. And frankly, the world is retreating from globalization, where it's going to end up, what it's going to look like, how balkanized or regionalized it's going to be. Who knows? The one thing I can say is Penn is not retreating from globalization and from engaging with the world. As certain people say, disasters are useful, and they're useful mainly for seeing opportunities and expanding. I can firmly say that Penn is committed to our global engagement and going to continue and, if anything, expand our global engagement. This is a moment where understanding other countries, understanding what's happening in other places, creating bonds among academics here and in other countries, creating bonds between our academics and other people who aren't necessarily academic, but in society, wanting to learn more is essential. And I can assure you that we are going to continue all of our activities, including these engagement funds, to facilitate research and work in other countries. One of the things we have learned, and I think it'll be on display today, is that when we originally thought of the China Fund, the India Fund, we were ourselves breaking up the world in units. One of the things we've learned is that some of the biggest problems obviously cut across and are global in nature. And we have begun focusing our work in trying to not just create collaborations among the researchers at different schools at Penn, but also unifying topics that really affect the whole world. So we've asked and requested grants that reflect climate change, obviously a major issue that can't be put in one region of the globe. And this year, 8 of the projects focus on that. We've also noted that there are, you might say, natural collaborations across schools that we were maybe 10 years ago not sensitive to, not paying attention to, not facilitating. And we are now in facilitating, much more in facilitating mode. My own biography is very committed to interdisciplinary work. I tend not to pay attention to school or department or specific technique. And I think we have increasingly adopted that view that what we do is most powerful if it's interdisciplinary, interschool, and takes a very broad but educated perspective. I can't tell you exactly where the world is going over the next 10 years and where we're going to end up. It is one of those issues. I can say, as I mentioned at the start and throughout, Penn is committed to globalization, a global footprint, and engaging with the world. And I, frankly, do not see any retreat from that. And so I want to thank you for your commitments to doing things global, for your research projects, and all of the work that you're doing, both in research in the classroom and with us at Penn Global on various activities. We are here to support you. We can't do this. We're merely facilitators, or in my original chemistry background, we're merely catalysts. You guys are the people who have to do all of the interesting and challenging work. So go forth and be productive, and we will be there to help support you with resources, with knowledge, with experience. But thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming and participating in today's symposium and meeting.
So with that, we will bring our first panel on stage, led by Dr. Dan Wagner, the moderator. So if you are in panel 1 and you are in person, we invite you to come on up stage. Yeah.
This one?
I don't know. Because I think the microphone is.
It's on.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Wagner. I'm a professor in the School of Education. And I am, like Zeke Emanuel, really delighted to see this continued expansion of the global engagement funding, and it's my privilege to be the moderator of this panel on human development and education. And as Dr. Emanuel said, there is a coherence in the groupings of the different panels. And I was particularly pleased to see that the School of Education, as well as another panelist in arts and sciences who is interested in education, join us for this panel. So I'm going to go in the order that we have, too close, on the symposium agenda today, the panel agenda. So our first speaker will be Michael Johanneck of the Graduate School of Education, where he's a senior fellow and director of the mid-career doctoral program and has been working for many years in Latin America and higher education. The second panelist is Deborah Thomas, I believe is Zooming in with us today. And she's in the School of Arts and Sciences, where she's Brownlee Professor of Anthropology with a secondary appointment in the Graduate School of Education. Our third panelist is Sharon Wolf, also in the Graduate School of Education, where she's Associate Professor in the Interdisciplinary Studies and Human Development program. And last but not least, my dear friend Amrit Thapa, who is a senior lecturer in IEDP, that's the International Educational Development Program. And I might add that that program didn't exist either before 10 years ago. So what Penn has been doing more broadly has also been picked up by a number of the different schools, including the Graduate School of Education. So as the panelists know, they each have 5 minutes to describe their project. And after that, we'll moderate questions both in person here and that may zoom in on the web. And we will try to end on time. In fact, I'm told we will end on time at 1:45. Thanks very much. Next, Michael.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dan, and thank you to Penn Global for your support of this work. I'm actually responsible for clicking ahead. There we go. So it's my pleasure to share with you a project that we're going to be kicking off this summer, and try to do so in 5 minutes before the hook comes out. We're trying to, and I want to at least present within 5 minutes how we're going to solve some major world issue with this project. So let me start with the major world issue, which is the challenges that we're facing in education. Given the size and scope of that as a challenge across the region, we are taking a particular focus on school leaders as a point of leverage. This is a group that the Inter-American Dialogue said a few years ago were the forgotten stakeholders of the education systems in the region. And so we're going to focus on those who are running schools, which have been right in the middle of the maelstrom of the pandemic, social unrest, increase in mental health needs, economic dislocation, and so forth. Further, we're going to focus on an aspect of the development and support of school leaders, and that is the aspect that is their ability in the moment to make good judgment calls and decisions in the highly volatile context in which they're operating. So you can see on the right hand of this slide here, the team that we are very fortunate to have working together from across the different schools at Penn and across 3 other universities outside of Penn in the region: the Technical Institute of Monterrey, University of Los Andes in Colombia, and the Catholic University in Chile. We see the challenge for school leaders particularly along 3 lines. One is that school leaders are telling us at multiple levels that they increasingly face situations of decision-making on a day-to-day basis that are ambiguous, that are time-sensitive, that are emotionally charged, and that the range of conditions that are being faced has only exacerbated. The inequities that became highlighted have gotten deeper across this time period, and the ability of leaders to adjust to it seems to us is a key leverage point for change. Second, a lot of the formation, and there's a lot of lack of formation across the region still, but formation traditionally has formed along the lines of emphasizing your development of knowledge, your skills, the dispositions you need to be, for instance, a school principal. What we find, of course, though, is that what folks need is to figure out how do you put it together in the moment. As the context and environment continues to be so volatile, what is that capacity? What do we know about it? How can we develop that intentionally? And so our focus is on what we're referring to as this in situ professional development. Third, so much of the development of our leaders, school leaders across the region is done in isolated ways. within their school building, not even within their municipalities often, and systems, let alone across the region. And what we want to do is to develop a tool that not only will help in that development, but will be done in such a way that it's developed as a cross-national tool from the get-go. So that is our objective across this, and to try to open up the black box, if you will, of practice of when folks actually have to make those decisions. So here is very briefly what we're attempting to do. Again, across the 4 institutions, Penn, Los Andes, Tech, and Catholic U of Chile. These 4 universities will begin to, on the left-hand side of this diagram here, get together practitioners in each of these countries to begin to generate scenarios of practice, the kinds of ambiguous, time-sensitive, emotionally charged situations that are most vexing to our school leaders. Out of that, into the second circle, we will be developing either 1 or 2 anchor simulations. Think multimedia, web-based pathing simulation that allows folks to be forced to have to deal with decisions and live with a consequence. And that would be an anchor simulation that we develop, same decision tree, but then adapted in language and in culture to the 4 countries that are participating. We will then take that out to a set of both novice and veteran principals, and then carry out analysis on that based on patterns that we see, decision matrices and so forth, looking at both background attributes as well as correlates to judgment that the literature suggests, things like tolerance for ambiguity, preparation for future learning, and so forth. We will then have as a basis for that the ability to implement that into programming. Part of what is exciting about this project, oh my, 1 minute left, there we go. I'll bring it to New York accent speed. Is that we are developing this tool with the same individuals who are also a part of a larger collaboration that we're also have underway. So we've been working with these 3 institutions as a part of a larger network, La Red Interamericana de Liderazgo Educacional, the Inter-American Educational Leadership Network, which now has 9 institutions and growing. That reached several thousand school principals last year. We will be implementing what we learned from this, as well as the tools themselves, through that network, as well as through the leadership programs that are now at these 4 universities. In addition, we are now launching this year, with it thanks to the Spencer Foundation, something called the Judgment Project here at Penn, which is a cross-professional, cross-school project to get at that in situ professional development, learning from the other disciplines and other professions that have already been working this area, so that we don't have to do this kind of work alone. We can borrow from and learn from and advance together with School of Medicine, School of Nursing, business, and so forth. So that is our effort. If any of this is of interest, I'm more than welcome your involvement and connection. And thank you very much.
Are you ready for me to start? Here we are. Hello, everybody, and thank you for convening and for facilitating the virtual presence. I have to teach class at 1:45, so I'm happy to be able to join virtually. And I want to let you know that I'm speaking on behalf of myself, Grace Sanders Johnson, and Crystal Strong, who are my co-collaborators on this project, which is called Citing Black Girlhood. So the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the deep inequities of our social systems, and protests against police killings drew broader attention to anti-Black state violence worldwide, but the gendered dimensions of these problems are not always fully understood. Next slide, please. While many have come to recognize the suffering of Black boys and men as acute and eventful, Black girls' suffering has remained largely invisible and unaddressed. Research shows that as early as preschool, Black girls in the United States are treated as older than they are. They suffer pervasively from sexual abuse. They're expected to take on levels of responsibility that exceed their years, and they face harsher punishments within the criminal justice system than their male counterparts. So as one way to bring the issues facing Black girls globally to public attention and to celebrate and support Black girls, we're conducting a multi-year project that will cite, S-I-G-H-T, cite, S-I-T-E, and cite, C-I-T-E, Black girlhood in Philadelphia, Jamaica, and South Africa. Slide, please. Citing Black Girlhood incorporates a team-taught course that includes a travel component, artistic and community-based collaborations with partners in Philadelphia, Jamaica, and South Africa, and a traveling exhibit that will also generate ongoing engaged research geared toward meaningful interventions in the lives of Black girls. We ground our work in the exhibit and portrait campaign recently mounted by the Colored Girls Museum, founded and directed by Vashti Dubois. Slide, please. This project, The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face, was designed to offer the portrait of the ordinary Black girl as a monument and a ritual of care. The project was envisioned as a traveling experience through which the portraits would cross boundaries and move around the world, developing the company of other Black girls in other places. So Citing Black Girlhood proposes to be one engine of this travel, and we're working with partners in Jamaica and South Africa to develop locally relevant iterations of the exhibit. Slide, please. In Jamaica, we collaborate with Deborah Anzinger, an artist and founder of New Local Space, which is an artist-run contemporary visual art initiative in Kingston. In South Africa, we are collaborating with Victoria Collis Buthelezi, who directs the Center for the Study of Race, Class, and Gender at the University of Johannesburg, and Zetu Matubene, who is the South Africa Research Chair in Sexualities, Genders, and Queer Studies at the University of Fort Hare. We are currently finishing up team teaching the first iteration of the course with the involvement of our partners in Philly, Jamaica, and South Africa. 9 undergraduate and graduate students participated in the course. We had our last class yesterday. And Victoria is currently teaching her version of the course in Johannesburg. Zetu will start teaching it soon at the University of Fort Hare. We've developed the syllabi for these courses collaboratively, and there are a number of common readings and viewings across the classes. This summer, we will travel with students from our class to Jamaica, where students will interact with both artists and community-based organizers working on issues related to girls, women, and community development. And Deborah Anzinger is leading the process to select artists who will create portraits with whom our students will also be working. Students will have similar opportunities and experiences in South Africa during the summer of 2023, working with additional community partners there. In both locations, students will learn about the continuities and the specificities of issues facing Black girls in different diasporic locations by participating in discussions and encounters between our team and our partners in Jamaica and South Africa. So by the end of summer 2023, we will have mounted exhibits in Jamaica and South Africa, adding to the first time retinue and catalyzing and building upon initiatives in both these places. I will just mention to conclude that our South African partners are applying for funding to convene a final gathering of all the project partners during the winter 2023 or spring 2024 semester, during which time we will also engage the question of potential policy impacts and continued collaborative work. Our overall intention is to contribute to an archive of Black girlhood that reimagines and redefines it as a space worthy of protection and celebration, and that counters existing discourses that emanate from a variety of institutional spaces in our societies. We hope to contribute to a process of community dialogue and participation, one in which people work toward the changes they feel are meaningful to the experiences of Black girls. And by working across contexts and by sharing insights from these contexts, we seek to broaden the toolkits people are using in their own advocacy and to bring to light the many convergences in our experiences. So the resource guide that we develop throughout the courses, both at Penn and in Johannesburg and Fort Hare, and the archives that we're building while on site in Jamaica and South Africa should help to strengthen a diasporic network of scholars and artists interested in Black girlhood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Sharon Wolf, and I'm thrilled to be able to tell you a little bit about our project, Leveraging Early Adolescence for Development, community-based research to inform longitudinal and experimental evidence from Ghana. So early adolescence, this is the stage between 10 to 14 years, is a major turning point in the life course. Puberty triggers tremendous biological and social transitions that shape the future of adolescence and adulthood. And early adolescence is a key window of opportunity for human development, also in terms of brain plasticity. Yet we still really understand very little about this stage, and it's why early adolescence is often referred to as the missing middle. And so our project is going to fill one of these gaps on early adolescent interventions and how investments made in early childhood, another foundational period of human development, might be complementary to investments made in early adolescence, these two critical windows of opportunity. So far, the effects of early adolescent and early childhood programs have been analyzed separately, but no study has assessed the interactions of the programs at both life stages. So for instance, we don't know whether interventions in the early adolescent years can consolidate and boost benefits from early childhood programs, nor do we fully understand whether early adolescent interventions are able to mitigate the effects of early life disadvantage. Similarly, we don't know if early adolescent programs alone can close inequities, for instance, by gender. Which you know there are pathways at home and the school that are associated with these outcomes, but whether interventions that aim to target these contexts can ultimately close inequities from early life. So the goals of our programs, with the Global Engagement Fund is to start to help fill this gap by building on an existing study, an existing longitudinal study that we've been doing since 2015. And what the funds are allowing us to do is to conduct focus groups and interviews with parents and adolescents, and really spend a lot of time understanding their views of their strengths, the strengths of their relationships, their strengths of parenting, and the challenges in the relationships and life stages that are specific to early adolescence. And we will then be working with them specifically to adapt a program that has been already tested in Ghana, and get their insights to iteratively innovate and pilot test this program. We'll analyze the data, develop the program, and then we have an in-depth 3-month pilot study that we'll do with 50 families. And as I mentioned, I'll just put these all up. This is part of a larger study we've been doing. So this is part of the Quality Preschool for Ghana study, which started in 2015. This was a randomized controlled trial of an early childhood intervention conducted in preschools in Ghana. So children were randomized to receive higher quality preschool compared to business as usual preschool. And we have seen now over the 7 years of following these children, there have been sustained benefits around social and emotional and executive function, and also some academic outcomes up to 7 years after exposure to this intervention. We just received another 5-year grant from the European Research Council to re-randomize children now that they're in early adolescence, to conduct an additional intervention where we can test these dynamic complementarities between early childhood and early adolescence. And as you can see in the blue bubble here, this is where the Global Engagement Fund is really giving us the opportunity and resource to really spend time developing and make sure we get the intervention right that we'll be then testing over the next 5 years. And we have a lot of plans to collect additional data as part of this longitudinal RCT, including we'll be looking also at stress and hair cortisol. We'll be collecting data on schools and on children and caregivers. So we have a really wonderful collaborative team here. We're working with, at the University of Ghana, Richard Apia and Peace Tete, who are both have backgrounds around parenting and adolescence specifically, Peace specifically around parenting during adolescence, who will be helping us in the development of the intervention and working with us on the larger project. My colleague at the University of Barcelona, Elisabetta Orino, and then here at Penn, Jerry Bierman in economics and global health, and Harsha Thiramurthy, whose expertise is in behavioral economics. So I'll end there. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Global Engagement team for the support and this opportunity to be here. And it's a privilege to present in front of esteemed colleagues here and all of you. So our project is titled Climate Schooling and Learning in Rural India. It's a mixed method study, and it's a collaborative project. We have researchers from Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, Narzar Khalid, Emily Hanum, and Dr. Jerry Berman. I'm presenting on behalf of all, and we also want to involve Cassie and Upiasi later on in this project in the form of conference and learning more. So just to give a little background about the case of India, India's education, and the stratification context. India has 361 million school-aged children, which is the largest in the world according to World Bank report 2019. And the education system is defined poorly in terms of educational outcomes. For example, according to a UNICEF study in 2019, only about 43% of the children in grade 3 can read a grade 1 text. Right? And society is highly stratified along gender, caste, religion, and class. Now, on the climate issue, those of you are from that area, and those of you who have worked in that area, due to India's geophysical and climatic features, India is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world. And recent news is a testimony to that. We have a heat wave going on there. Around this time, the temperature is supposed to be around 33 degrees Celsius, but right now it's 40 and estimated to increase more. So that is the situation. And one statistics is between 1980 to 2017, India experienced 278 floods affecting 750 million people and causing an estimated of almost $59 billion in damages. So that is the nature of the problem. So we found out that surprisingly, there are not many studies in this area. And given this increasing, deteriorating climatic conditions, we are very interested to study this dynamics between climate change and education in India. And these are our two research questions. Number one, are children from socioeconomically and politically marginalized social groups more likely to be exposed to flooding? And then second one, does the vulnerability of flooding of children's education vary depending on caste, religion, socioeconomic status, and gender? For that, we are planning to use a mixed method study. For the quantitative analysis, we are planning to utilize two data sets. The first one is India Human Development Survey, IHDS. It is a survey of 40,000 households. It is conducted in 2011-12. And another very commonly used data called Annual Status of Education Report. In short, we call it ESSER. And both of these data sets have information on the frequency of floods in rural India, as well as educational outcomes and socioeconomic information. In addition to the quantitative study, we are also planning to do an interview and focus group to get an insider perspective. So we're planning to go to India this summer and interview school leaders like headmasters and vice principals and teachers to get an insider perspective on what they feel, how the floods is affecting them, and then much more. So our timeline, this is a pilot project, and our, we are planning to study two states for this pilot phase, and that is Bihar and UP. And as you can see there in the map, the area which is colored red is by the intensity of the floods. And as you can see, I'm originally from Nepal, and you can see that because of the Himalayas there, and lots of rivers in the north, those two states, Bihar and UP, are very prone to floods. I'm almost done. So our hope is that we will be able to use this study, and depending on what we find in the study, we wanted to scale it up and do a multi-year and multi-state study. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Chris, can I start from here? Okay, in the interest of time. So we have a short amount of time, and it's obvious that these are fascinating pieces of research that each panelist has presented, and of course with their co-workers, and an impossible task to go into each of them in depth. But I thought of one broad question that's obviously been on your mind as you develop the projects, and will be on your mind when you are doing these projects, is about the pandemic. And so my question to each of you, if you care to answer, would be, what did you have to think about in advance, and what do you think you're going to find in terms of maybe how you had to deal with it before, not knowing what's going to happen in the next year or two, and what do you anticipate are obstacles moving forward, given the pandemic? And I have a second question after, so let's keep it short if you can. And why don't we go in the order that you spoke? So Mike, and we'll see if we can do that.
So I think I would anticipate, at least, let me just emphasize two what I think are upsides of having had this horrendous experience over the last couple of years. One is that the idea that we need to do this across boundaries is really clear. If there was any resistance to the idea that this needs to be a cross-national approach, that has been eased. We're now been working together with people that we've never met in person for a couple of years now to build out this network. The second is the need for site-based autonomy of the school leaders we're working with has also become very clear. That's also where it's also often been where the sort of the secret of success was in very quick local judgment calls made to adapt to the situation. Both of those being areas of focus I see as benefits to what we're trying to pull off.
Okay, very interesting. Deborah, are you there? Would you?
I am. Well, I guess I'll say that in the before times, a number of us had been across these locations, Philadelphia, Jamaica, South Africa, had been speaking regularly and trying to determine what kind of project would allow us to move across our spaces and examine an issue in a way that could connect us and also build collaborative relationships with community-based organizations. And we continued these conversations as everybody went into lockdown on Zoom. And I think as there was a growing awareness among many people about the incredible inequalities that shape all of our societies, about which people had already been doing a considerable amount of activism, it became clear that this was something that could frame our work together. Obviously, in thinking about travel now with students, that has been a question, but I feel confident about our ability to be in Jamaica this summer for sure. And, as time moves on, we'll look again about South Africa next summer.
Thanks.
Yeah, and in our case, we are working with a longitudinal sample. So these are children and families, about 3,000 of them that we've been following since 2015. And so during the pandemic, we had to pivot and make sure we could reach them. And so we switched to phone surveys, and we've developed a really good system of making sure we can stay in touch with these families and children. So I think that will be to our benefit if we need, again, to do that. In Ghana, for over a year, schools have been open. Life has mostly returned to normal. But the other thing I'll add is that we have a lot of data on how these families were faring during the pandemic when there were lockdowns. And so we can understand that and use that in our subsequent analyses.
Yeah, even in our project, we totally acknowledge that, uncertainty is the only certainty. And given that, we felt that we will go ahead with Zoom and phone calls, but frankly speaking, I think that would not reach the marginalized people in rural India. So we're really, really hoping that we'll be able to go, and it happens to be around monsoon time, and be able to see exactly what is happening and talk to people. But we do acknowledge that. So I'll keep that short. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have just a few minutes left. And this may not be a question that we can all answer, but I think one of the things that always is on minds both of institutions like Penn, but also us as academics, and even the people we were working with, is the sustainability dimension of the work that you are doing. That's a big question, and it can refer to different kinds of stakeholders. I just wonder if anybody has a little snapshot kind of answer about how you see your work 5 years down the road. What's it going to mean? Sharon, you're nodding and you're close to me, so I'm going to ask you.
Well, I'll just say that we've been working very closely in partnership with the Ministry of Education in Ghana in all this work. So our preschool program that we designed with them was designed to be nationally scalable, and we have the same goals for the adolescent intervention, that it's designed through existing systems where it could be replicated and scaled up if it were to show to work. So.
Okay, anybody else?
I would just say that we building in the development of this tool as something that is developed collaboratively will also then strengthen the capacity to implement it as we go forward. Additionally, the premise that we can find a capacity that is cross-national is also, we think, will position us well for regionally based funding as well for further expansion of that.
Deborah, I see you kind of nodding there. Did you want to jump in on that?
Sure. I would just say that I think the beauty of an inductive, iterative, and research process that's really grounded in creative work is that you don't know what the outcomes are going to be and what kinds of conversations and collaborations it will catalyze, but it always does. And so I just look forward to strengthening our networks and to bringing additional people into those networks to see where we might go with this in the future.
Okay, Amrit, would you like to?
My comments are very similar to earlier, so I can skip that given the time.
All right, so I know that the 0 minutes is coming up. I have maybe 30 seconds. I can't believe we made it on time because all of these are so interesting, and we just did have a very brief look at them. And I want to, again, maybe just thank Penn Global, Perry Worldhouse, the University of Pennsylvania for investing. I know that Zeke Emanuel was saying that 10 years ago or more, I've been around for a lot longer, and I know how tough it was to get global funding. This is not and never should be taken for granted the kind of funding that comes this way for such exciting work. So thank you, Penn, and thank you all, and good luck in your projects.
With continued thanks for your patience and appreciation for our schedule here that we're trying to keep, make sure that everybody's able to present and get back to their classes on time. We'd like to queue up panel 2 now. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Jeannie Birch as the moderator to introduce our panelists.
So this panel is focused on climate change and climate justice. As scholars focused on climate change, we have an opportunity to engage in research that promotes a deep understanding of the relationship between the built and natural environments, that reaches across disciplines to cultivate a broader understanding of design and planning issues and solutions, to engage the social and environmental equity issues that recognize the consequences of design decisions. And these roles are especially important today in light of the recently released IPCC report. This report shows that greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and that current plans to address climate change are not ambitious enough to limit the goal that we're trying to reach at 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. A threshold of scientists believe it is necessary to get to this to avoid even more catastrophic impacts. But what's particularly troubling about emissions is that they are not evenly distributed, nor is the research on which these findings are based evenly distributed. Largely absent are substantive explorations of the effects, challenges, and opportunities for addressing climate change in the global South. The following 5 presentations will contribute to this much needed work. They'll be dealing with air, they'll be dealing with water, they'll be dealing with the earth, We have Susanna Burkhauer from the Wharton School working on improved cook stoves. We have Tom and Brianna Tarsons from the School of Veterinary Medicine, looking at a farm in Gambia, making that sustainable as a research and teaching center. We have Alan Plant from SAS, working on African dark earths in Ghana. We have, speaking for Richard Weller, Rob Leventhal of the Weizmann School of Design, telling us about the Mega Echo region and best practices for implementing large-scale nature-based solutions. And we have Christina Langs from SAS working on water rights at the interface of constitutionalism, climate change, and extractivism in Latin America. So we have multiple schools, multiple areas, and it's a very exciting presentations that we'll have now. So first we'll have Susanna.
Great, thank you so much. Very excited to be here. This is work joint with Josh Dean, who is at the University of Chicago. Promise I have just one slide with text. The rest is all pictures. So the motivation for this work is that millions of people across the world still cook with biomass, so wood fuels, charcoals, and these produce significant air pollution. So we're talking specifically about particulate matter, PM, as well as carbon monoxide. Exposure to these types of cooking-related smoke emissions cause millions of deaths per year, according to the World Health Organization. And in addition to those deaths, there's also significant adverse health impacts, primarily respiratory illnesses, eye problems, and burns. So this research, we're going to be collaborating with 1,000 study participants living in Nairobi, in Kenya. These are low-income informal settlement areas in the eastern parts of Nairobi, so a relatively urban setting. And we're going to be building on an experiment that we started in 2019. So all 1,000 participants use a Jiko to cook their daily meals on a daily basis. They'll spend up to 20% of their income buying charcoal every day. And they use a traditional stove that's pictured here called a Jiko. It's about $4. So all 1,000 individuals use these stoves on a daily basis to cook all of their meals. And then we offered individuals the opportunity to adopt an improved version of the stove. Now, as you can see, they're actually very similar to use. Their structure is very similar. They have similar ashtrays, etc. But the modern stove is produced using significantly improved insulation materials like ceramic wool and others. So you actually, the engineers had predicted that this would require significantly less charcoal to reach the same temperature, simply because the materials are just much better. The difference, of course, is also that the price is $40 rather than the $4 that the Jiko had. So what we did in 2019 is we had a randomized experiment where some individuals received a small subsidy of between $10 and $25, and some individuals received a large subsidy. And we used that random variation to identify the impact of stove adoption on charcoal usage. And what we find was quite stark. So you can see at 0 is the main adoption time. You can see before that, people who adopted the stove and those who didn't had very similar levels of charcoal expenditures. This is weekly spending, so it's about $1 a day. And right after adoption, you see that people who adopted the stove have significantly less charcoal expenditures. This is a drop of about 40% relative to those who didn't adopt the stoves. Households save about $2 a week. That may not sound like a lot, but it adds up to a lot of money. $120 a year is about a month of income, so these are very large savings. When you quantify the CO2 emissions, it's about 3.5 tons per year. If you assume a social cost of carbon of $42, this back of the envelope calculation suggests that's about $147 in avoided CO2 emissions on an annual basis. So this is existing work that we're going to be building on. That paper is now forthcoming at the American Economic Review. And what we're hoping to do this summer is follow up with these individuals to measure the air pollution and the health impacts of these stoves. So it'll be 3 years since individuals have adopted these stoves. Ideally, this will be 3 years of daily usage of 40% less charcoal on a daily basis. The first question that we'll ask is whether air pollution has gone down. So we'll measure carbon monoxide and particulate matter, PM2.5, with advanced technologies. We also have another advanced technology called a backpack, which we'll ask people to wear for 48 hours. So we'll measure their ambient air pollution as experienced by individuals, both during cooking in the morning and in the evening, and also as they're going about their day walking around. So it's possible that actually there's a lot of pollution from cars or trucks nearby. So we want to be able to factor that in as well. So the first question is on air pollution, and the second question, if we see any improvements in air pollution, whether that has impacts on health. So we want to measure physical health. That'll include things like blood pressure, blood oxygen, child outcomes. A lot of children under 4 will spend the whole day with their mother, so you can imagine impacts on child height or weight, and then also self-reported symptoms. And then we also want to measure the impacts on cognitive health. So we're working with tools from psychology. There's some research that indicates air pollution might affect things like your working memory, response inhibition, and attention. And so we're going to be using these tools from psychology, kind of games that people can play that can estimate whether reductions in air pollution potentially also have cognitive health benefits. I'll end there, and thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you guys so much for having us here today. My name is Brianna Parsons. I will be talking about Gambia Goat Dairy, and I do just want to thank Penn Global for putting this on and for supporting us. It's been great developing relationships with you. So again, I'm Brianna Parsons, and the other principal investigator on this is Tom Parsons. We're both veterinarians. Other notable collaborators are our Gambian partners, Sule Kamara and Saini Baji, the Medical Research Council of the Gambia, who we're starting to collaborate with, and the University of the Gambia, who we're exploring programmatic partnerships with. So conceptualizing our project really comes down to looking at the first 2 UN Sustainable Development Goals, no poverty, zero hunger, really holistically instead of siloed, and looking at what role sustainable agriculture has to solve them. So this schematic I use when I'm teaching my students. We're not going to go into the depth of it today, but fortunately, before I conceptualized how interrelated these goals were, I got to learn about them from the Gambia. So I started working in the country in 2016, and I've been really fortunate to get to meet almost all of the stakeholders involved in agriculture and human nutrition and environmental stewardship, and really gain that community trust. So working and living in the Gambia over the past 6 years, I've gotten to understand that poverty plagues the Gambia, as does food insecurity, and it leads to over 25% of the children being stunted. The country's very agriculturally dependent. A lot of people work in agriculture, but they're still importing 35 to 45% of their food needs in any given year. And between food imports and underproductive livestock agriculture, nutrient-dense animal source foods like milk, meat, and eggs are really cost prohibitive for the Gambians poorest to consume. Smallholder farmers continue to live in poverty. Women continue to raise livestock, but they're largely excluded from marketing and sales of animals and therefore the profits. And so overshadowing all of this is land use and talking about climate change. Human land use is the largest driver of biodiversity loss in the country, and climate change itself contributes to volatility in agricultural production. So I've worked in the Gambia, I've gotten to see the trends play out in the country, but then I've started to realize really how interlinked poverty and malnutrition are. And so that's why I bring up this schematic and bring up the fact that poverty is a social determinant of health. So it's impacting malnutrition, it's increasing malnutrition in that way. And then malnutrition is leading to increased disease risk, impairing cognitive development, leading to healthcare costs. So it's impacting poverty, and this whole cycle continues, and this whole thing is intergenerational. So just to scope it a little bit, malnutrition, the largest risk factor in global health. Food insecurity is disproportionately impacting Southeast Asia and the African continent. And animal source foods, there's a growing body of literature showing that they're preventing stunting malnutrition if you're able to consume just one of these foods per day, but they're largely cost prohibitive in the Gambia and in other regions of the world. So what we're really doing with Gambia Goat Dairy is trying to understand the power of sustainable agriculture in solving some of these goals. So we've taken a lot of care as an organization to define what our areas of impact are. So just briefly, improving community health and well-being, reducing poverty, improving food sovereignty and economic development, empowering women and youth, and fostering environmental stewardship. So what this looks like for us at the farm, we're addressing human nutrition at that production level, trying to produce animal source foods affordably and in a way that's good for the environment. We are conducting agricultural research on the questions Gambian farmers need answered, and then trying to accompany all of that with outreach, specifically targeting women and youth, but also just agriculturalists. And so there's not time to talk about food sovereignty, but I can talk about food sovereignty in the Q&A if you guys are interested in what that means. And another thing we've learned through this is that there's a lot of uncertainty in this space, so your values matter as an organization. So ours are really to be community-centered, to be impact-driven, and to really look for these systems-level solutions. The other thing we've learned through this project is that like even the best laid plans take time. So as we conceptualize our really ambitious goals through our Holman Africa Research and Engagement Fund Award, we know there will be some fluidity with our timeline. So 2016 to 18, that was our feasibility and planning time. 2018 up until now, we've been doing infrastructural development. We have a farm, and we've been doing a little bit of pilot testing. And so our big plans, I can talk more about this, but they're overarching. It's research, multi-year research studies looking at animal health and nutrition, looking at land management, education and outreach, having this be a practical site for the University of the Gambia, doing community outreach, looking into sales and marketing of our milk and milk products and the whole kind of food value chain, hosting student internships, which we're really thankful again for Penn Global having us be a campus partner to support that, and doing impact assessments. So ultimately, we're trying to figure out what is a model and methodologies for inclusive, sustainable agricultural development. So with that, I'll thank our team, our Gambian employees, our US advisory team, all of the student interns who have been with us over the past couple of years, and my contact information's there. We love to collaborate, so please do reach out. Thank you.
Sorry, I was so wrapped up in my own talk, I didn't know I was next. There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to share my enthusiasm for this project. I'm also participating in a Penn Global seminar, so I leave for Iceland with 14 students to cover 1,000 miles in a van 2 years after COVID and social isolation and everything else. So I have some more challenges ahead of me in other locations. But today I want to talk about a project that has been a long time in the making, recognizing some collaborators with me here. Maurice Slocum, who is my PhD student, whose dissertation is very much centered on this project, who would be here but is at home anxiously awaiting her visa so she can get to Ghana very soon. Johannes Lehmann, who's at Cornell University, who is actually the genesis of this program as a soil scientist who collaborated with some anthropologists in the initial phase of this project almost 10 years ago. And Dr. Edward Yeboah, who is our collaborator on site in Ghana in the Soil Research Institute in Kumasi. So I just want to open up with a description of what is a dark earth. I have slides here of two contrasting soil profiles. This is an area of the world that has very old soils that are typically not very fertile because they are so old. Much of the mineral nutrition has been leached out of these soils over tens and hundreds of thousands of years. And it's also a place in the world where has been unable, for many factors, unable to participate in the Green Revolution. And so agricultural development based on inherent soil fertility is very challenging. In response, we have a management system that is very similar to, if you've heard of it, the Terra Preta soils in the Amazon. So the Terra Preta soils in the Amazon are pre-Columbian human-modified soils where organic matter was intentionally accumulated. And those soils are what we consider extinct. They're no longer managed the way they used to be. African dark earths, in this case, are still extant soils. They're still managed the way that we see. And so this accumulation of organic matter creates this dark color and is what is of particular interest to us. So these, as you read through these objectives that I elaborated in the proposal, I wanted to sort of synthesize them into two categories. The first is just the material science of examining these soils and doing physical, chemical, and biological characterization of these soils. And the second grouping of objectives is really to create the collaborative infrastructure. Soil science as a discipline can be very extractive. I often tease myself and say I do my science by UPS. People just send me samples from all over the world and I stay in my lab and I just analyze them. Here, what we want to do is really build out the collaborative nature of this. And so part of the project is the exchange. So we are going to be hosting a graduate student from Ghana who will be working on this project to work in our laboratory, in addition to sort of our sort of on the ground sampling and analyses in Ghana. So the specific questions that are driving this about soils are why carbon is being stored in these soils, how the carbon is being stored in these soils, so what are the properties and what is the biological process. There's a lot of interest right now about biochar and biochar amendment to soil as a solution for sustainable agriculture and climate mitigation. And the question is if you remember what this old cartoon, and I used to think it was a Gary Larson Far Side, but it's not, is the mathematician who has the chalkboard and somewhere in the middle magic happens. We are anticipating that this is where the space we are working in. We have dark earths on one end and biochar amendment on the other end, and we don't know how those two things come together. So the timeline is, as I mentioned, Maura will be heading to Ghana very soon. Then she's actually heading to the West Coast to actually do some of this biology. Once we've had this initial sort of established set of samples and everything else, then the plan is to invert the relationship, thank you, invert the collaboration and have our Ghanaian collaborators coming to Penn to work further on the elaboration of the project and to achieve the scientific goals of that. And so we hope to sort of use this as the springboard. This is really, in spite of the fact that this has been 10 years in the making, this is the springboard to further collaboration and elaboration, part of which we hope to involve additional Penn units as well as my laboratory going forward. So that's, I'll leave you with that. My contact information is there, and I know we are already, the goals are being achieved. I'm already talking with people today as well. So thank you very much.
Hello all, my name is Rob Leventhal. I'm a second-year PhD student in the City and Regional Planning program. With regrets, Richard Weller, the Chair of Landscape Architecture, Urbanism, and the principal investigator of this grant, is unable to make it today, so I will be presenting in his stead. In our research, we are joined by Dr. Caroline Kuski, the Executive Director at the Wharton Risk Management and Decision Processes Center, Professor of Practice in Architecture Matthias Bau, and some exceptional master's students. The research on mega-eco projects arose from a gap in two major concepts: nature-based solutions and mega projects. Nature-based solutions are, as the name suggests, environmentally based works that look to provide adaptation benefits to wildlife and society. This term was coined by the World Bank in 2008 and has exploded in popularity since, with over 2 million peer-reviewed journal articles. Popular literature on nature-based solutions now call for the rapid deployment and upscaling to meet the interrelated challenges of climate change and the extinction crisis. However, large-scale nature-based solutions are not a new phenomenon. Landscape architects, planners, designers, and others have been working on them for over a century. Perhaps the closest term that works with infrastructure at this scale is megaprojects. The study of megaprojects started in the 1960s when publicly funded infrastructure began creating a plethora of billion-dollar endeavors. However, by definition, megaprojects are composed of man-made materials like concrete and steel. A recent study of hundreds of these works by Ben Flyberg has found that they are almost always over budget, over time, and underperform, which he deemed the iron law of megaprojects. Today, these works make up 8% of the global GDP and have the ability to determine if a country flourishes or flounders. Experts believe 24% of the GDP in the next decade will make up mega projects. To fill these gaps and prevent similar circumstances from occurring with these emerging upscaled nature-based solutions, Weller and I have coined a new term, mega-eco projects, which we have defined as complex landscape-scale environmental restoration and construction endeavors that aim to help biodiversity and communities adapt to climate change. From our research, we have identified over 170 of these projects so far. We have further developed a typology composed of 4 types based on overlapping mission statements, habitats, and approaches. While roughly 20 of these works are over the $1 billion threshold, we are taking the mega prefix to also be measured in size, scope, from which we have created qualifying characteristics from each type. From this grant and study, we are collaborating with the Wharton School to determine how these projects are financed. 2 research assistants led by Dr. Kuski will explore 20 case studies and create a literature review to be published on large-scale conservation financing. These same 20 projects will be mapped and their environmental performance evaluated by 2 research assistants at the Weitzman School of Design. We will then hold a symposium inviting the leadership of these projects for roundtable discussions on this new concept and their thoughts towards best management practices and risk avoidance in their experiences. The 2-day symposium will also have an exhibit of research assistant findings, mappings, have guest speakers, and will lead to a new website to catalog these works and create opportunities for greater collaboration. To get the ball rolling, Weller and I will publish a paper introducing mega eco projects this summer. Additionally, I will spend the next 2 years with the generous funding of Penn Global to visit and conduct interviews at 4 exemplary case studies to determine how these works are perceived and bought into by local stakeholders as a form of ground truthing. This will serve as the basis of my dissertation, fill a gap of local perceptions on nature-based solutions in emerging economies, and will shape the future of mega eco projects. One of these case studies will be the Great Green Wall Initiative, which is a $14 billion investment to halt the expansion of the Sahara Desert into the arable Sahel region. I had the opportunity to visit this project as a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal in 2014, which ultimately sparked my interest in pursuing this study. I am excited to be working with these similarly focused professors and thankful for your support. For questions, inquiries, or statements, please contact Richard Weller or myself at the email address provided below. Thank you.
So hello to everyone, and a special, obviously, thanks to the Penn Global program for the opportunity to carry out this project, and especially to Chris for his tremendous positive energy and administrative support and the opportunity to connect today via Zoom from Southern Chile. So if you could switch the slide, please. So I just want to conceptualize a little bit, the first one, yep, thank you, how this project came about. And it has to do with the particular conjuncture in Chile with the estallido social, or the massive protests and demonstrations that began in October 2019, which led to a national referendum that voted to rewrite the country's constitution. And the current constitution was drafted in 1980 during the Pinochet military dictatorship and effectively neoliberalized the country, including the entirely privatized water code that even deepened during the democratic transition with the privatization of sanitation. So next slide, please. So Chile's unique geography provides an extraordinary variety of climatic conditions for water availability, including being home to 80% of the glaciers in South America and 11% of glaciers currently existing in the world. And these glaciers are extremely important freshwater reserves, as their melting not only contributes to summer stream flow, but also as a primary source of surface and groundwater recharge for over 10 million people's drinking water during summer months, as well as in periods of drought. And despite this, the World Resources Institute ranked Chile as the country most at risk of suffering hydric crisis in the Americas due to drastic reduction in snow and rainfall, the overexploitation of water sources by industrial agriculture and mining sectors, and privatized water management. So next slide, please. And northern and central Chile has been suffering what is called a mega drought since 2010, producing advancing desertification and internal climate migration. So this multi-year research project draws on the fields of environmental and legal anthropology, social studies of science and technology, and environmental humanities to focus on the following. So next slide, please. So first, I'm working with a panel of independent researchers of the sciences of the crisosphere which is a group of Chilean and Argentine scientists who are advocates that are participating in what has been a 16-year-long debate to create a law to protect their country's glaciers in the face of a powerful mining lobby. And so our idea is to render visible how activist science unfolds in a context of neoliberalized science culture, where the state has tended to purchase scientific evidence and advice from markets. Next slide, please. So I'm also collaborating with 2 Mapuche communities in the Araucanía region of southern Chile who have ancestral relations with glaciers that form part of their self-determination struggles in Wallmapu, their ancestral territory. So neither the country's water code nor the proposed glacier legislation has incorporated indigenous knowledges and practices. And I'm accompanying these Mapuche communities in intercultural dialogues with glaciologists to build popular education materials such as the image that you're looking at, and raising questions about how to decolonize glacier science. The next slide, please. Another aspect of the project is work with agro-pastoral Andean communities and citizen science initiatives in central Chile, as well as other forms of community activism in defense of glaciers from industrial mining. For example, citizen efforts to protect these rock glaciers that you're looking at that are quite different and actually practically ignored compared to the typical pristine white cap glaciers that are most commonly recognized by people. And these rock glaciers provide up to 60% of the country in the metropolitan area, particularly with water during summer and drought conditions. And next slide, please. And the last aspect of the project is work with engineers who are building ice stupas. It's a NILIS project in Chile, which is based on south-to-south technology transfer between the Himalayas and India in the Andes, combining ancestral knowledges with artificial intelligence to store meltwater in the face of hydric crisis and glacial recession, or looking for a nature-based buffer solution to the hydric crisis. So you can change to the next slide if you'd like. So the project is going to be supporting the production of public engaged materials such as a documentary film and popular education materials with both glaciologists and local communities in Chile. I've put my email below, and this project emerges out of an interdisciplinary research cluster with the Center for Latin American Latinx Studies at Penn that Tulia Fuyeti and I co-organized this past year, and that I will be continuing to co-organize with John Hawkins, who's a professor and new professor in the Earth and Environmental Studies Department next year, and which gathers graduate students, undergrads, postdocs, visiting scholars, and faculty to work on transdisciplinary issues across and transdisciplinary topics across these issues that I've mentioned today, with water rights, social environmental conflicts, and the cryosphere. And I think that we're looking forward to jointly applying to an NSF proposal to look for future funding that would be with glacier scientists and with John in the Earth and Environmental Studies Department. And also there are future funding opportunities in Chile with artists and glaciologists to continue this work. So thank you. And definitely please be in touch if you'd like to be in touch and collaborate with us.
Thank you. Now it's time for questions. The enthusiasm, the range of these projects is extraordinary, just absolutely extraordinary. So you've heard the opportunities that you're facing. What are the challenges that you think you'll be facing as you approach these projects? Why don't we start with the order? We'll start with Susanna.
Difficult question and one I wasn't anticipating. I mean, the obvious challenge is COVID, I would say. We had originally intended to do health and air pollution measurements perhaps a year after, and we were unable to, so we did phone surveys initially. So I think that's been, so we're very excited to finally be able to visit individuals again. Yeah. We'll come back.
Let's go to the farm.
Okay, so I'm going to start with challenges we have faced. So COVID obviously was a huge challenge. Operating a farm under a pandemic is unbelievably challenging, especially when I'm away too. So I'm thankful for our team and their ability to kind of pivot and do that. Other challenges that we faced so far have been finding funding. That has been really a difficult challenge for us up to this point. So fortunately for us in Penn Global, like that's an alleviated challenge for right now. I think challenges we're going to run into now that we've received this funding and we're kind of able to scale what we've already proven, which is our team. The challenges I see, one, our research is inherently multi-year. We're doing animal studies, we're looking at land management. These things take time. So getting those research results and getting them out into the public, to the beneficiaries, that's going to take time. So that can be challenging, just kind of reporting results to folks. I think the other challenge we're going to face is building our team. We already have a small trusted team, but then building that out, making sure that you're bringing on the right people. And yeah, bringing on people that are trustworthy, that are passion driven. I think that'll be a challenge we're running into. I'll chime in if I come up with others, but those are the two big things that come to my mind. It's a hard question.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a unique challenge. I think I share the same challenges as any field work, which is the matching the expectations with the practicalities of what happens in the field. And that we're not always in control of what happens in the field, and surprises will happen. And it's one of the major communication messages that I've sent to the students that are involved in this, is that anything is a success.
That's lovely. Yeah. Very nice. Rob?
Dr. Birch is my professor, and she always asks really tough questions. I think at least for myself, some of the challenges are the regional nature of mega eco projects. And if I'm trying to look at local perceptions, making deductions from a regional project is quite hard. Another thing in that this is a kind of a global study, language barrier always is an aspect that's hard to overcome. And when you're doing interviews, of course, dialects and the meaning of words always changes. So getting the real meaning behind what people are thinking about mega eco projects will be challenging.
Christina?
Yeah, so I think there are several particular challenges. I mean, one that Chile is currently in the process to rewrite its constitution, which will have to go through a national referendum, and it's unclear about what will be happening with water rights and with rights of nature and different environmental legislation that will come out of this process or not. And I think another challenge is building trust between Mapuche communities and scientists, given long history of conflict, militarization of their territories here in southern Chile, and of kind of systematic exclusion of them in these knowledge production processes around environment and their ecosystems that they live in and have long, ancestral relations with. And perhaps the other challenges in general is about protecting glaciers in the face of climate change, and particular human-based interventions such as mining, which in Chile is extremely difficult. The mining lobby, which has been just blocking any attempts to protect glaciers, and the work of both scientists and communities to defend and protect these very important beings and ecosystems. So I think those are the challenges in the project.
So you all had common things that are contextual to your project, but I saw three heads nodding when you mentioned trust, Christina, building trust among the people that you're working with. And so that's something for us to all learn in terms of how you do this, and you can teach us researchers further about that. Each one of you are doing things that have public policy implications. I'm wondering if you'd like to think about and tell us what you think some of the public policy implications might be of your projects. And I'm going to start with you. Susanna's very happy I didn't start with her.
Okay, start with the hardcore lab scientist. That's fair. That's fair. I think one of the things that in terms of the connection between the science and the policy, one of the things that I want to be able to achieve is a certain element of realism. I think there are public media books. There's a lot of ink being spilled to say that soils will save us from this climate crisis, and that's materially not true. And so, but it is part of it is a mouse in a small army of mice rather than a single large elephant that will solve this problem. And I think it's a calibration issue about the degree to which soil carbon sequestration might be able to help with the problem, and calibrating expectations for that.
That's really interesting because each one of us thinks what we're doing is going to solve the problem. So that's great.
So in terms of policy, the first thing that came to mind for me is just kind of how global food trade is set up. Structural adjustment loans in the 70s and 80s that were really promoting cash crops. A lot of smallholder farmers in Gambia I can speak to, but kind of across sub-Saharan Africa switched from self-sufficiency, producing rice, producing other crops that fed the household, to growing these cash crops, opened up the markets for a lot of food products to be imported. Like I said, Gambia is importing 35 to 45% of their food needs any year. And the country has lost a lot of that rice producing ability that they used to have. So now they're importing rice, they're buying that rice and not producing the foods that they need. So that brings up that idea of food sovereignty, that really nations should have access to culturally appropriate food and they should have ownership over the production systems themselves. So I think that is kind of a policy that we're looking to overcome by using the veterinary expertise that we have around production. So how can we help make something that works right now, knowing that that policy and the trade implications are there, making it difficult to be cost competitive with some of these imported foods.
Wow. Rob?
Feels like a test. In thinking about the Great Green Wall, this is a very top-down oriented project. It's financed by the EU, World Bank, and France, but it really affects the local people. And I'm hoping that through looking at local perceptions, that policy can help kind of help guide these projects so that they really help the local people and not the international community.
So informing policy through the work that you're doing.
Yes.
Susanna?
Yeah, and I'll try to also address the challenge question. I'll say two things. One is there have been a lot of people are aware of how big and important the issue of dirty cooking technologies is, and that 3 billion people still use these. It's such a hard problem that has been really hard to solve. And a lot of the time, the issue is that the technology itself, the modern technology, perhaps doesn't work in the way that people were hoping. People don't like using it, the food doesn't taste good, or things like this. So actually, this speaks to the point about trust in the community as well, and having that collaboration. There's a lot of technologies that have been pushed on individuals who actually don't want to use those technologies or are hesitant for very good reasons. So that's kind of one reason we're building on a scope that we know actually has a good track record from our earlier work, that we're hoping to see results here, so we'll see. And then the other thing, I think, taking a step back, from an environmental economics perspective, we always say, let's spend money on ways that are most effective in terms of achieving carbon emissions, right? We want to start by abating the lowest cost abatement technologies. And this is actually a technology that's not just very cheap, it actually saves money, right? It's like you can think of this as a negative cost abatement technology. And so if anything, if we're going to be pushing climate finance technologies, let's start with these types of technologies where we can abate CO2 emissions while also alleviating poverty at the same time. So I think that's going to be my strong push going forward.
Okay, Ms. Dana, you have 30 seconds to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that one of the aims of the project is really to support this this effort of the independent scientists to finally get a legislation passed to protect the glaciers, to render visible rock glaciers, which, as I mentioned, are often ignored and have been actually not included in the national inventory of glaciers in the Andes. And I think, on the other hand, the idea with Mapuche communities is contributing to reworking the curriculum for introduction to glacial science in the Andes, so that indigenous knowledges are part of that education program in the basic curriculum for glaciology. So that's kind of the public and the policy implications I hope that will come out of the project.
Well, I think you're going to meet your challenges. I have no doubt about that. And I think you're going to be making a difference in the world with the policies that you're going to be promoting. So thank you very much for this wonderful panel.
Gently with your attention, we're about to start panel 3. Once again, we're about to start panel 3. So if you are a presenter, we welcome you to the stage. I also would like to welcome Dr. Adebanwe to moderate this panel for us. He'll do some introductions. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, I have to leave early, actually, but I'll be able to make this. I have a class at 3:30. Oh, okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wale Adebanwe. I'm at the Africana Studies Department of the university. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for the third panel. The fourth panelist will be joining us very soon. So the first member of the panel is Sunday Akintoye from Delta Medicine. His project is on Penn-UNILAG collaboration on racial disparities in ameloblastoma recurrence. The second is Guy Grossman. His project is on Penn Development Research Initiative, Fellowship for African Scholars. And then we have Leigh Casanelli, whose project is on local histories of climate change in the Horn of Africa, and David Amposa, who will be joining us soon virtual, okay. Enchanted Geography, India in the West African Popular Imagination. So I would turn it over to the panelists, and after their presentations, we'll have a few questions, and hopefully we'll have enough time to have the audience. I think Sunday Akintoye should be the first.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we're doing a different order. Yeah, the order is
okay.
different.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm second. Oh, I'm sorry. So, Lee, please.
That's all right. Sure.
I was wondering.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Is this, the idea for this project started with an article I wrote for a small interdisciplinary journal of Somali studies. And its goal was really to divert readers from the usual polemical political debates and that divide Somalis about who should govern and power sharing and so on, and to just encourage especially young scholars to think about the severe climate events and environmental changes that have been occurring all over the Horn of Africa, not just in the Somalilands, but in neighboring Ethiopia. I'm sorry, I don't have a map of the Horn of Africa here. In Ethiopia, Djibouti, northern Kenya, it's a regional issue. And the idea was to look at patterns of how local communities are affected or have been affected in the last 50 years or more. I'm an historian, by increasingly severe climate events and unpredictable ones. And the response was very positive to that article, which came out last year. And the Holman Initiative then allowed me to kind of take it to the next step. I decided to try and put some of the many practitioners and researchers in the Horn of Africa into dialogue, into conversation with experts and with the larger discourses on global climate change. There are lots of naturalists and environmental activists that I've met over the years in the Horn of Africa. But many are working in relative isolation or obscurity, and they seem to welcome and embrace the idea of talking to other people in other countries, often divided politically, and there's a lot of conflict, as you probably know, in the Horn of Africa. But they were very, very enthusiastic about this. Historians love documentation, and there's a lot of documentation I discovered in trying to put this kind of sprawling article together on histories of environmental histories in the Horn of Africa. There's not only reports by NGOs on local communities which they visited in response to these to recurrent droughts, but there's literature on population displacement now. A lot of people moving from rural areas. The Horn of Africa, I'm looking mainly at semi-arid regions of the Horn, and people moving to cities, some of them permanently, it seems. Maybe they just don't want to,
struggle with livelihoods in these rural areas anymore. We have to find out if that's the case. But there's also a lot of literature on, vegetation arcs and locust infestations, which are very periodic and, in that region, on wildlife decline, firewood issues. Susan was talking about earlier today, charcoal issues and so on, debates over water rights, because most of the water rises in the Ethiopian highlands and ends up in the arid areas. So our goals for this convening award were relatively modest. And I hope it's just the start of a collaborative effort. As we speak, here are the objectives as outlined in the proposal. And as we speak, we're setting up the first of a series of remote workshops through the Rift Valley Institute, which is a local think tank that's done a lot of this brokering of conversations over politics and livelihoods and so on. And we're going to try to do it now with a series of environmental workshops where we're going to hear from local practitioners and people who have been working on the ground and who are eager to encourage some of their own students to go out and collect documentation, observations, memories of elders, what's happened to honey production, where have the acacia trees gone, what's happened to the medicinal plants that used to survive. Our livestock can't recover because pastures are eroding. There's deforestation. They're very much aware of it, but it's very, very much local. And the local folks don't have the luxury, of contextualizing their situation in the larger discourses. So our goal is to kind of try to document, assemble a lot of this data, to bring people into dialogue over 6 or 7 workshops, and then ultimately to train students both here at Penn and in the Horn with my colleagues to conduct field research on questions that we need to answer that the current documentation doesn't answer. Ultimately, we hope that Penn students will learn enough and be trained enough to go and participate in small team research projects in the Horn of Africa. Okay, so we're working with think tanks and the institutes here. Here's some of the outcomes, which you can read yourself. And the partners in the Horn include a wide range of institutions and organizations that I kind of discovered and people put me in touch with when we started talking about this. This guy, Ahmed Awale, has found a purple aloe plant that's got a lot of medicinal benefits that's kind of come out of the desertification of a lot of the region. He's also got a scorpion named after him in the classificatory literature. People like this, I'm finding, and all of these institutes have individuals or centers that have been working on a variety of these issues. So the idea really is to engage in discussion, to learn this year what's out there, what can be done, have experts from Penn have their input, and ultimately to kind of, I'm getting too old for field research myself to do extended field research, but I certainly am excited about mentoring young students here, young scholars here and in the Horn, to go and conduct this work in the future and hopefully have some input into larger discussions, regional and continental plans and policies to mitigate the effects of climate change, but always looking at how it looks and what are people doing at the local level, how are their decisions being made, and are there patterns that are not they're not going to be reversible. We have to understand that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present our work today. My name is Sunday Akintoye. I am the principal investigator on this project, and I'm privileged to be working with 2 eminent scholars. One is Dr. Effiong, who is an oral pathologist, who is the primary collaborator at the University of Lagos, and here at Penn Dental is Dr. Battaglia, a co-investigator. So the 3 of us are working on this Penn UNILAG collaboration on racial disparities in ameloblastoma recurrence. This is a 2-year project, What is ameloblastoma? This picture shows exactly what it is. It's a jaw tumor that grows fast, rapidly growing, and it stays in one place. It just grows in that spot. The picture of the lady on the left shows the primary tumor, and usually this is removed by surgery. And the middle picture shows the same patient after the surgery, when the tumor was removed. Many times the tumor is removed with some normal tissue of the jaw. The third picture shows the same woman 14 years later. The tumor came back on the other side of the jaw. And this is the pattern that is seen when this tumor occurs. In whites, in blacks, it's the same pattern. It comes back. But the thing is, it comes back more in the black racial population. If you look at our data here at University of Pennsylvania Health System, 24% of the tumor will come back and recur, the table on the left. But when you look at the data and stratify it, and look at the black racial population, 66.7% will get the tumor recur, it will recur. You may not see people walking on the street here with this kind of tumor, because with our technology here and health, we can really detect it when it's still small. But it doesn't matter whether it is small or whether it is this large, it comes back. It still recurs. In Africa, with a large population, 50% of it will come back. And so our interest is to know why. Why does it come back? And why does it come back more in the racial population? So we thank the Penn Global Award for allowing us to be able to do this project to address the health disparities and see and understand why the Black racial population usually get a high recurrence. So we're going to be accessing the large tumor population at University of Pennsylvania because they have a large tumor bank there. We're also going to be getting fresh tissues from jaw surgeries that will be shipped to us for analysis. We're going to be looking at several mechanistic processes why this tumor comes back. Now, using this project, we then want to use it to also promote intellectual exchange between the Penn collaborators and the University of Lagos collaborators. The project is a two-pronged approach, which is the development of the research collaboration, and the second one is training and capacity building. So we're going to work together to do monthly joint lab meetings and work on projects together, get fresh tumor samples from there, shipping them over here. That's going to expand the collaboration. At the same time, we're going to use this to train the junior faculty on research processes and research methodology so they can actually do their own research and learn how to do their research. And we hope that this is going to enhance the collaborations even more, not only at University of Lagos, but also other schools within Nigeria. In fact, we are beginning to make contacts with other schools and universities, and we're hoping that the Penn Global Award will allow us to arrange seminars and conferences to be able to allow the junior faculty to get equipped in research methodology while at the same time we're addressing the health disparity of this particular tumor. So again, I would like to thank the Penn Global Award for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Great, so sorry to disappoint, I'm not Guy Grossman, I'm Dara Sido, I'm here on his behalf though. So this is, I'm gonna be presenting our sponsored project, the Peter I Fellowship for African Scholars. It's a project of the Penn Development Research Initiative led by Guy Grossman in political science, Harsha Tirumurti at PSOM, and myself, but it'll be implemented in collaboration with many of our affiliates, faculty, staff, and graduate students. So why are we starting a fellowship? Okay, there's something wrong with this clicker. well, I can keep talking anyways, so why are we starting this fellowship? Okay, there we go. We know that researchers from sub-Saharan Africa and other low-income countries are severely underrepresented in international development research, especially in the quantitative social sciences. It doesn't matter if you look at journal publications, conference presentations, we know that's the case. And sort of a part of the reason why that's the case is that sort of it's very hard to access research inputs necessary to do high-quality, rigorous research, such as significant funding, research infrastructure for field projects, and advanced technical training that's not always available at local universities, say in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's a huge problem on the grounds of equity, but also intellectually. We're just missing out on sort of key perspectives and research by people who know local environments best. And so a parallel development that's happening is that funding organizations like foundations, increasingly require or request researchers in the global north to partner with local researchers in the global south on sponsored research projects. And that's a welcome and necessary trend, full stop. But what it means is for researchers, say at a school like Penn, especially junior researchers who don't have any pre-existing sort of connections, networks in the countries they study, it can be challenging to form equitable, equal research partnerships with local academics. And so to help address these inequities, leading development research organizations, especially the Center for Effective Global Action at the University of California, Berkeley, but also others, are increasingly sort of launching capacity building efforts to help address these gaps. And that's where our fellowship fits in, and we'll be sort of cooperating closely with some of these other organizations on this. So we have 3 goals basically with our fellowship. We want to start interdisciplinary research partnerships between Penn researchers and African scholars based at African institutions. We want to provide hands-on training and research opportunities for scholars at African institutions, and more broadly expand ties between Penn and research institutions, universities, think tanks, others in sub-Saharan Africa, which we think might also help to sort of increase the overall visibility and reputation of Penn on the continent. So what will we do? Later this year, we're going to put out a call for applications for a residential fellowship here at Penn for the fall of 2023 that'll be open to social scientists from any country across sub-Saharan Africa. They might be PhD students, junior scholars, junior faculty, postdocs. That call is going out later this year, and of these applications, we will select 3 fellows to join us here at Penn next fall. And while here at Penn, they'll engage in a range of activities, including auditing or taking advanced courses in the social sciences on international development and advanced research methods. They'll sort of initiate and develop their own research projects with PhD students and faculty here at Penn. Each fellow will be paired with a PhD student as a partner and a faculty member as a mentor. They'll have the opportunity to participate in PDRI's academic events, workshops, seminars, et cetera, but also engage with the broader Penn academic community. We'll put together a sort of symposium, and there'll be opportunities for guest lectures and similar activities. And then finally, they will have the opportunity to present and receive feedback on their own work in progress, their own research, again, in sort of PDRI seminars or workshops, et cetera. And so with the current resources we have, we're planning to implement this kind of on a pilot basis in the fall of 2023. But our goal is to unlock additional funding to both sustain this program over additional years, hopefully becoming a sort of annual event for PDRI and just a core part of our work in general. So that's just a quick overview of what we're planning to do. It sounds like many of my fellow panelists are doing very aligned work. So if anyone is interested, please reach out to us individually or institutionally to get in touch. Or just broadly, PDRI was still a relatively new initiative on campus. So anyone working on international development should get in touch with us if you're interested in learning more. Thank you.
Hello? Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I have an engagement directly after the panel, so that's why I'm joining virtually. So my project is titled Enchanted Geography, India in the West African Popular Imagination. I'm a faculty in African Studies Department. I grew up in Ghana, and growing up in Ghana, there are all these stories, mythologies that people tell about India and Indians. So I grew up hearing all the various stories about India as this mystically sort of enchanted space
as well as our Indians, specifically Hindus, as people endowed with supernatural abilities and powers. So I was interested in trying to figure out the origins of these stories, like these mythologies that people have constructed, like where they come from and the uses to which people put these stories to. Next slide, please. All right, so the West African Indian interactions really began in the late 19th century with the migration of Indian traders to mostly Sindhi traders to West Africa, like Ghana and Nigeria specifically. And in their various interactions with Nigerians and Ghanaians, people began to observe their cultural practices, particularly as it relates to Hinduism. Right, so like images of Hindu deities that were displayed in various shops owned by Indians and in their homes. Also in the latter half of the 20th century, West African soldiers, again from Ghana and Nigeria as part of the British forces fighting in Burma, were camped in India. And in their various camps before they embarked on war in Burma, they also interacted with various local Indian populations. And particularly useful here, it's that the fact that a number of those soldiers, once in India, consulted Hindu deities or gurus in some ways to spiritually fortify themselves before they embarked on the war in Burma. So I follow some of the stories that some of these soldiers, once they returned to Ghana and Nigeria, told about their experiences in India. Some of them wrote books, have accounts of their stories. Some of those stories can also be found in various veteran newsletters in both countries, and in particularly in Ghana's case, one prominent returnee built a shrine for the Hindu goddess Shiva as a way of thanking Shiva for saving him during the war. And so I look at the accounts of these returnees. And also important for this story is the circulation of literature on Indian mysticism, particularly the works of L.W. de Lawrence. It was very popular in North America and in Europe and parts of the Caribbean and Africa as well. And there are a number of people who point to the engagement with Hinduism or India through the works of L.W. de Lawrence. So I look at sort of a global circulation of literature about Indian mysticism and how it also impacted or influenced African ideas about India and Indians. Next slide, please. So the project will culminate in my second book project. It's basically the research that I'm gathering to write my second book project, and also hopefully a popular article that touches on one particular episode in this whole narrative that I'll show in my next slide, an image. It's going to be a 3-year research project. The first this summer will involve a trip to both Ghana and India. Next year will involve a trip to Ghana and Nigeria, and then the following year, the trip to Nigeria and India. I am making use of 2 research assistants, one a Penn affiliated research assistant, a student who will be helping me go through a number of digitized newspaper records, particularly from Nigeria and India. And then I'll also have a research assistant on the ground in Ghana to facilitate that aspect of the work. Next slide, please. All right, so on my left is an image or a poster advertising a show. So Professor Okurin, Professor Hindu, right? So this individual on the left, and then next to him is actually the famous Nigerian musician Fela Kuti. He became Fela Kuti's spiritual advisor, but he was also a magician, and he built his image and his popularity around this mystique of a Hindu, a person who was endowed with like Hinduism or Hindu spiritual capability. So he called himself Professor Hindu, right? Sort of a direct reference to imagining people had about what being Hindu or what being Indian actually conferred on people. And on the right is also, it's a billboard in Ghana and the eastern region of Ghana,
an indigenous religious priest who is advertising his service, right? So, but it says Indian power, right? And it's also become quite common then for some indigenous religious priests to advertise their services while making use of Hindu deities, right? So here on this billboard, we see Shiva, for instance, that is captured. And these indigenous religious priests know that once people see images of Hindu deities, they in some ways understand them to have supernatural powers that is sourced from India. Part of talking to some of these indigenous religious priests also, you will hear stories or accounts of people going to India, right? And and some of them have actually made the trip to India, but for others, when you probe further, they will tell you they didn't actually physically go to India, but they embarked on spiritual journeys to India to fortify themselves. So this research generally is interested in the origins of these ideas and the uses to which people actually put these ideas to. It's going to be a cultural history, cultural and social history of the idea of India as this mystical space, and also Hindus as a people endowed with mystical or supernatural powers. And unlike a lot of research on Africa-India engagement that really centered on Southern Africa as well as Eastern Africa, this research project in some ways incorporates West Africa, particularly from the cultural and religious sense, in looking at how West Africans really viewed India and Indians once they encountered like Indians in their midst, and also on the Indian subcontinent. I will have research help from the University of Ghana, the University of Mumbai, and the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. So these three institutions will be helping facilitate the research as I gather the materials for the second book project. And I thank the Penn Global for the resources to be able to embark on this project. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your excellent presentations. One of the priorities of the fund is to encourage and support collaborations between people here in Penn and your collaborators and institutions in Africa. So based on your experiences, what would you see as some of the biggest pieces of advice that you have on how to and how to engage in this kind of collaborations and partnerships based on your experiences? I'll start with that, Victoria.
For me, the opportunity opened up as a Fulbright scholar in 2016 to Nigeria on a separate project. And it was while I was there that we conceptualized this new project since 2016 to the point where we're now at this point. We've made some progress with this project. So it's really a case of knowing what is a major challenge in the area and to encourage the faculty to look at it critically from the research perspective, and to let them know that this is something that they can be empowered to pursue. So that will arouse their interest. And with that, it makes it easy to collaborate with them and to encourage them to work hard to make this collaboration successful.
So for us, I think what's really important in the fellowship that we're starting is, a sort of an alignment of interests. So as we're sort of thinking of, the fellow that we'll be selecting, we have sort of a range of scholars here at Penn who work on topics ranging from environmental issues to labor to, governance. And so I think, what we're really looking for is, as we sort of select fellows, we want people who sort of have research that's aligned with what scholars here at Penn do, to make those collaborations as sort of organic as possible. So as part of the fellowship, what we'll be encouraging is a Penn faculty member to submit a funding proposal together with a visiting African scholar. And so those types of things that can only, be successful if there's a sort of pre-existing alignment of interest, which I think is something we'll be looking for.
We have to be realistic about the bigger trend, in the region where we're trying to collaborate. In the Horn of Africa, one thing that's happening is this decentralization of universities and of regional think tanks and so on, to kind of reflect the needs and resources of those particular areas, whether it's in Ethiopia or in Somalia. And there's a great interest in giving upcoming students in these small universities that aren't always well staffed or well resourced opportunities to do serious research. And so I'm hoping that part of this will be with the elders who are already working on these projects, the opportunity to train these students. We're going to provide small field recorders and some modest transport funds to get people into regions or communities or villages that have been hit by a series of these climate problems, so that that we'll have to see if it really works. The incentive is that they'll be able to share what they're doing with a larger audience through these remote workshops. So students will have a chance, from the beginning maybe, to see the fruits of what they do. That's one thing. The other problem, of course, this is happening everywhere in Africa, but in the Horn in particular, is urbanization. Young people want to be in the cities. They're kind of oriented to the cosmopolitan economies and so on. And elders complain that they're losing all the indigenous environmental know-how and classifications of local things, and so elders want to push them to encourage at least a handful of people to kind of get to know and learn, what their ancestors have known about local ecosystems and rangelands and so on. So there's a kind of a push from that side to do work or to find incentives to collaborate. And I think we're just trying to kind of assist and empower these local actors to train the next generation, of environmental researchers. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Okay. David?
I think for my project, I think it presents the opportunity to collaborate with a couple of departments or centers on campus. So the Department of South Asia, for instance, potentially see myself presenting an aspect of the research at one of their symposiums, and also the Center for Advanced Study of India. I think also working with a graduate research assistant will also be another way that collaboration between faculty and student happens. And then the international institutions that will be facilitating my research also present other avenues for further collaboration.
Thank you. You are all focusing on different regions, the communities in Africa. What lasting challenges do you think the pandemic will pose to you and your collaborators, and how would you respond to these challenges and resolve them? Let me start with the reverse. David, do you want to start?
I think for me, it's mostly since I'm looking at three different sites, I'm working in three different sites. We'll be looking at the particular national regulations around COVID travel. So certain restrictions that have been put in place, I have to be cognizant of like when I can travel, when I cannot travel. For instance, this project will probably not have been feasible last year because both India and Ghana and Nigeria also had travel restrictions. Like nobody could really go into any of those countries for a particular period of time, but that is over. Hopefully that the current situation remains the same. And so I simply just have to hope that things remain the same and that the opportunity to travel remains available. But I think that once I get to my site, my research will mostly involve archival research. There will be some interviews as well, but basically the major challenge will be accessing some of the research, some of the documents. And I already have been in touch with a couple of people, particularly in Ghana and Nigeria, and might have some challenges accessing a few documents because they have been taken out of circulation because they are in really bad shape. So that might be a problem that I face as somebody who is looking at like archival materials.
Yes. I haven't been able to travel to the region since the start of COVID, but it's clear that work is still going on. There's an archival component to this project as well, to compile a lot of the historical evidence and reports and so on, various levels of investigation. But there's also, there are a lot of teams of people who are going in as giving emergency relief aid or helping to feed people who have been displaced from rural communities into urban peripheries. And they're the ones who are generating information. So we're going to try to kind of get them to ask a few questions that will serve our project as well. To say, what are people doing? What are family heads deciding? Are they leaving some kids back with the herds in these remote areas, or are they all moving to the city? Do they want to get out of the rural livelihood business, and rely on their national relief agencies forever? I mean, these are hard questions that the Somali government is trying to deal with. The Ethiopian government is doing as well. And so I think it's a matter of connecting with people who can see what's going on now until we can get back there. I'm hoping to go back in the summer of 2023 to kind of meet all of these local collaborators who I hope will be doing, at least preliminary field research at these various sites.
Okay. Yes.
So we hope we will not be too badly affected by the pandemic. Part of the reason why we set our timeline for the fall of 2023 is that, we want to be very optimistic that we can, bring them here in person. And so, what our partners who are implementing similar programs have done over the last 2 years is, implement similar types of fellowships almost fully remote, delivering classes, trying to establish new research partnerships just via Zoom. And so we really want to avoid that. And that is why we're planning for fall of 2023. And I think we can be pretty optimistic that that'll work out for us.
Thank you.
Our project is two-pronged, the research component and the capacity building. We do not anticipate any effect of the pandemic on the research component because we can communicate, we can ship samples back and forth. We do anticipate travel issues with respect to the capacity building, but we do have alternatives because now we can do virtual conferences, and we're hoping that ability to set up the virtual conferences will allow us to really overcome the effect of the pandemic.
Thank you. Do we have any question from the audience? We have time for one or two quick questions. One, okay. No questions? Okay, maybe one last question for me. One of the major critiques that African scholars often tend in these kinds of collaboration is that the archive of much of the knowledge generated is often in the West, that, depending on the nature of the project. Do you have any way of responding to this in terms of ensuring that the knowledge generated is shared and, when it's possible, archived also in the continent? Anyone whose project is relevant to that, just one minute.
Yeah, I think a number of my friends and I we usually digitize newspapers for the various national archive centers in Ghana in particular. And when we do that, we actually give copies to the National Archives in Ghana as well, as a way of sort of appreciation for the ability to be able to do the work, but also to provide other scholars, right, who might come along the way to have the chance to be able to do that. But some of the newspapers are actually also in bad shape and potentially might be out of circulation in a few years to come.
Any other?
People, well wired, even the more limited the physical infrastructure in some way, roads, no hard top roads or water supplies. Everyone's hooked up in some way to phones or internet, and that's why knowledge, I think, can be shared. And so we want to kind of try to create a kind of an accessible archive. And some of these small institutes really have had funding from international NGOs, and they have the capacity, I think, to store and disseminate information. So I'm fairly optimistic that we can do this with coordination.
Yeah, final.
Yeah, our project is such that each a collaborator comes in with different expertise, and so we're hoping that by the time we advance into this project, we will have done a cross-fertilization of our expertise so that we can replicate what we're doing in one university at another university, and then there can be continuity even beyond the Plain Global Award period.
Okay. Let me, on behalf of the organizers, thank the panelists for their presentation, and I thank the audience. Thank you very much.
If I could have your attention, please. So we'd like to start panel 4 now. So I'll welcome Dr. Harsha Thirumarthy to the stage to be our moderator for panel 4. And if you are a panelist, we welcome you to join the stage now. Harsha, we'll have you sit. Hey, how are you doing, man? Good to see you. Hey.
Are we ready to go? Okay, perfect. All right, well, welcome everyone in person as well as online. I'm Harsha Thirumarthy from the Perelman School of Medicine. I'm an economist and also a former beneficiary of funding from the India Research Engagement Fund. And we're going to be hearing today from our panelists about recently funded projects that they're leading in India. So I'm going to briefly introduce our 4 panelists, and then you'll hear from each of them, brief presentations from each of them in sequence. Our first panelist is Tariq Tachil from the School of Arts and Sciences and also the director of the Center for Advanced Study of India. And then we'll be hearing from Sharat Chandra Guntuku from the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, followed by my colleague Heather Schofield from the Wharton School and the Perelman School of Medicine, and finally from Thomas Chartrand from the School of Arts and Sciences. So we're looking forward to hearing from each of you about your work and your projects. We'll have a few questions for you when all of you have completed your presentations, and also we'll open it up for our audience Q&A. So please hold on to those questions as you hear these presentations. Thanks.
Thanks so much, and thanks everyone for being here, and thanks so much to Penn Global, and especially to Chris for his able support, but also to Scott for answering many questions along the way. My co-investigators on the project are Adam Auerbach, who's based at American University, and Shikhar Singh, who is at Yale University, and as of July 1st will be a postdoc at CASI with us, working full-time on this project. And the project is broadly titled Understanding India's Urban Future. And since we're into like panel 5 or 6 or whatever we're at right now, I'll be as 30,000 foot as possible, but of course happy to answer any questions. Basically, the broad premise of this 2-year project is something that Adam and I have been working on for several years, but have been looking to scale up, which is looking at, kind of unstudied questions or understudied questions on India's urbanization. So from 2020 to 2050, India is going to add roughly 416 million people to its cities. That's roughly the population of the US and France. And most of the focus on India's urbanization has been on megacities like Delhi, where I was born, or Mumbai. However, much of the growth in urban India has been in small towns. So a stat that very few people, including experts in India, know is that 85% of India's nearly 8,000 towns have fewer than 50,000 people. And actually twice as many people live in towns with less than 100,000 people as in cities with more than 5 million people. And yet there are very few rigorous studies of many aspects of life in small towns, including what we are going to focus on. This is just a map of northern India where we've been focusing much of our research. And these are the number of cities that we have over 100,000 people. These are the cities with below 100,000 people. And again, we're hard-pressed to find systematic research on these spaces on urban political economy and urban governance, which is our focus. And so really what we're looking at is trying to understand what are the specific governance challenges that small towns in India face. And to the degree that we've been able to find existing studies on the topic, they tend to assume that these towns are going to face the same issues that larger cities face, just on a smaller scale. However, some of our preliminary research has already suggested that this need not be the case. So there's weaker core infrastructure in many of these small towns and big cities, which you might expect. So, most lacked paved roads within the towns. These are several towns within the northern state of Rajasthan that we visited. However, there are problems that go beyond what big cities are facing. So unlike Mumbai and Delhi, 94% of towns in India don't have even a partial sewage network. They also have a systematically weaker own resource and tax base. So on average, bigger cities, again, like Delhi and Bombay, collect between 60 and 70% of their budget from their own residents in the form of taxes or user fees. The relevant figure for the small towns we've been studying is about 25%. And I should say, this is only data from the 2 states in which we've actually hand collected the budget data. We haven't seen any national level analyses of these budgets. It's one of the things we're hoping to be able to do as part of this project. And so what this reveals is many of these small towns are really in their infancy of setting up basic, taxation systems, basic systems of municipal governance. Most citizens do not pay taxes, are not aware they're supposed to pay taxes, not aware that they're supposed to pay user fees for services like water and electricity. Have low expectations of their city governments, which often fail to meet even these low expectations, and a vicious cycle therefore ensues. And we're looking for creative ways to both study these cycles, but also potentially hope kind of alleviate them. And so to do that, basically over these 2 years of this project, we're looking to do a range of data collection across about 200 small towns, especially in the northern state of Rajasthan and the adjoining state of Madhya Pradesh, where we want to conduct extensive surveys of citizens, elected officials, and frontline bureaucrats, these 3 core actors who are at basically the core of small city governance in India. And just to give you an insight, we did actually during COVID just a pilot study over the phone where we did a phone survey of local elected officials just to get a sense of what they thought their roles were supposed to be in advance of this kind of scale up with face-to-face survey work. And I have to say, even as a longtime cynic of governance in India, I was kind of blown away by some of those findings just from the phone survey. We found that less than 40% of officials knew that their governments were supposed to levy taxes. Less than 1/3 knew that they were allowed to charge user fees. And less than 2% could name where their powers in the Constitution actually were enumerated. We didn't ask them what those powers were, we just asked if they knew where they were even supposed to be enumerated. And those very systematic knowledge gaps for us reveal that often when we see these governance challenges in these spaces, the assumptions are that it's because of corruption or apathy, and some of that may or may not be the case, but very often we've encountered well-intentioned local actors who simply don't know what they're supposed to do. There's been a massive experiment in democratic decentralization and administrative decentralization in India, where these local town officials in these newly urban spaces are being empowered with a wide range of tasks on the books. However, if they don't know they're supposed to do these things, then I think it's unfair to expect them to be able to do them very effectively. And so our hope is that through these surveys and through this face-to-face work, we're going to establish and diagnose some of these governance challenges. We're then going to share them with the departments of local bodies in the states in which we do this work, with the hope that we may be able to inform training exercises or ways to address some of these knowledge gaps, to kind of address some of the low-hanging fruit with small-scale urbanization problems in India. And then finally, we're going to conclude the 2-year period with a workshop on small-scale urbanization to be held in conjunction with our sister institution, UPRC, in New Delhi, bringing together a range of policymakers, bureaucrats, as well as academics to both share our project findings, but also hopefully launch a research agenda on small cities and India's urban frontier. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Yep, that's me. Hi, I'm Sharath Guntuku. So I'm a computer scientist by training. This is a project in collaboration with Alison Buttenheim, who's in the Penn Nursing. So we've been looking for the last 1 or 2 years, trying to understand how big data sources, especially language on social media sources, can be used to understand misinformation and also deliver or create messages that are targeted and tailored. So misinformation comes in lots of shapes and sizes, and especially in India, we've seen all sorts of variants in terms of religious heterogeneity and in terms of people attacking specific minority communities and so on. So and especially in the US, we've, over the last 4 years, we've developed a tool of lots of techniques to basically computationally listen to big social data sources. So for instance, in the US, we are currently collecting data from Facebook public groups, Twitter, Reddit, and we're getting about 5 to 10 million posts a day that are relevant to COVID. And we were able to actually summarize these things, these posts, and also, so let me try and focus a couple of studies here. This is a very crowded slide. So for example, on Twitter, we found that people were talking about symptoms like loss of taste, loss of appetite, almost 1 month before CDC actually posted them on the official list of symptoms. And we've also seen that conversation around COVID vaccines, they very closely mirror vaccine uptake. For instance, we've seen that counties in the African American South, in the American Communities Project, there's a lot of talk around trust in medical doctors and the historical trust issues, and this also reflects in the corresponding vaccine uptake. So, and we've also built sort of machine learning models that can use these data sources and sort of synthesize or summarize target keywords or target themes that can be tested. So for instance, we've looked at how people's conversations around masking have changed over time, how people's conversations around, oh, this is just like the flu, it'll just go away, sort of transition into, oh, now we are really in trouble. So currently for this project, the plan is to do it. So the project is based in India. We want to collect data from 4 different social media platforms. One of the new ones being WhatsApp groups, which is, I think, the single largest, most popular platform in India. Everybody in my family uses it and has forwarded at least 5 different messages every day, starting with a good morning message every morning. So we've sort of want to collect posts across 21 metropolitan areas in India. So and then so we are starting big, collecting data from a lot of urban places, and then we want to use the models that we've developed, specifically the natural language processing and machine learning, to sort of extract and identify high prevalence and high salient topics as they relate to misinformation. And then this is where the expertise of my colleague comes in. We sort of want to bring these themes and then talk to clinicians locally, especially in a couple of places in India, starting with Delhi. This is where we're also working with UPRC to identify local partners. And we want to bring some of these computational social listening products and then evaluate their utility with clinicians. And then we sort of want to collaboratively generate and test inoculation messages and see how the entire pipeline can be closed. So yep, those are my collaborators and those are my students, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And a small nugget, because I have time, right? Yeah, so this is a bit of personal information. So 4 or 5 years back, I was here as a visiting intern when I was doing my PhD. I was doing my PhD in Singapore, and I was in the Penn Global Research Symposium, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I should be here somewhere sometime, and I'm really glad that I got this opportunity to work with Chris and Scott, and also do this project. Yep, thank you.
Keep going. Okay. Well, thank you for being here today, and thank you so much for hosting this lovely symposium. It's been great to talk with people so far. My name is Heather Schofield, and today I'm going to be talking about a joint project with Louisa Sifala, Sapri Kaur, and Yogi Deshamdasani. And the topic of this project is about building the habit of regular labor supply in the informal market. And as you might guess, it takes place in India. So the motivation for this is really that employment rates in many low-income settings continue to be very, very low. So in India, for example, both in rural areas and in urban areas, and focusing on men who are more likely to work, among informal laborers, the labor force participation rate or the employment rate is typically about 50%. So people are working about half the days that they could be or that you might expect. And most of the discussion around this kind of big stylized fact really kind of centers on the idea that maybe there's just little labor demand. There just aren't enough jobs out there. But a puzzling fact in light of that is that there actually is quite high turnover in a lot of jobs and quite high absenteeism, which isn't really a demand side characteristic, it's more of a supply side characteristic. And so that made us start to think about maybe there's more to this story. It's not just a demand side problem, potentially there's also something going on the supply side. And in particular, what we're going to look at is whether these low employment rates could also be due to very irregular labor supply. So our hypothesis is that regular labor supply is actually just a general skill that can be acquired. So when you grow up in a setting where you're not really expected to go to school or rewarded for going to school on a very regular basis, and then you move into, say, agriculture where the work is very irregular, maybe it's just not a skill that you pick up. And this actually very much kind of accords with a lot of historical evidence. So if you think back to the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of discussion about how do we move people from this kind of rural agricultural setting into factories where this regular labor is really rewarded. And so what we're going to do in this project is see whether we can help people form that habit to help shift into this kind of more formal market. So to do that, what we're going to do is work at labor stands in Chennai, India, where I have a lab. And these labor stands are basically just big public spaces where casual laborers will come and search for employment. So you should think of just street corners, bus depots, that kind of thing. And both people who want to work and people who are looking for workers will show up at these spaces and try to kind of match on a very temporary basis. And this is actually a very common feature in many low-income settings. It's not just specific to India, which is kind of speaks a little bit, hopefully, to the generalizability. And importantly for us, it's the main source of income for many of the people that we'll be working for or working with. So this is their only job or their only real way to get a job. And very consistent potentially with this hypothesis that we have, people who tend to work at these labor stands only show up about 4 days a week in a place where it's typical to work 6 days a week, and they work about 3 days a week. The reason that we're choosing to work in these labor stands is twofold. One is we think it's actually a very important labor market. It's a big space where people find employment in these settings. And the second is that it's actually a great way to study labor supply. So what I mean by that is that often what you observe in data is the combination of labor supply and labor demand. Do you get a job? But we want to cleanly look at one side of that market. And the nice thing about these labor stands is they give you a very clean measurement of that. Did you show up today rather than did you get a job today? And so we can use that to study the supply side very cleanly. And what we're going to do in the study, it's a randomized control trial, is we're going to randomly assign people to a treatment arm or a control arm. In the treatment arm, the participants will get a small, about 5% of their daily wage, cash payment for arriving at the stand by 8 a.m. So just if you show up by 8 a.m. and you say hi to the surveyor, you get this payment. In the control group, they're going to get unconditional payments of the same average value because we want to make it fair and kind of control for those income effects. And so what we'll do then is we'll do that for 7 weeks, and we expect people to start working more during that time in the treatment group because of the incentives or coming to the stand more and hence working more. And then the key thing that we'll do after that point is we'll remove those incentives. And the key test that we'll look for is persistence of that effect, right? So do we see this habit formation? Is it something that you stick with even after the incentives are removed? We've run a small pilot with about 70 people of this study already. And what we found is it does seem to be a fairly meaningful effect. So when the incentives are provided, people show up about an extra day a week. Remember, this is on a base of 4 days, so it's a pretty large effect. And then even after those incentives are removed, we still see that that effect is about 0.6 days a week. And so they're correspondingly finding even more work as well. So we're getting started on the study soon. Hopefully COVID will not stop us for habit formation studies, but please do. I would love your feedback on the study as well. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I want to start by thanking Scott and Chris also for being with us the whole way here. The Kerala Maritime Communities Project, or KMCP, is a collaboration with Sonal Mohan at the Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam, Kerala, and other colleagues in India and the United States. And I'd like to do a shout out here to Kimberly Naronha, who is here, a PhD candidate in the School of Design, one of our team. The so-called traditional fishing communities of Kerala State on the southwestern tip of the Indian subcontinent are well known from ethnographic accounts and from the various struggles trying to preserve their ancestral lifeways in the face of environmental change and external interventions. For many ethnographies, we have learned about their boats, fishing practices, social relations, and gender roles. KMCP draws from that rich database, but with a different agenda. Essentially, we look back to the deep history of the relationship with the coastal and maritime environment. We assess the threats to their livelihood from natural and anthropogenic hazards, and we look to preserve vanishing traditional culture. The project began with a pilot season of 17 oral history interviews in 2014 in the districts of Alleppey and Trivandrum. The second phase currently comprises a team of 9 colleagues from anthropology, history, urban studies, archaeology, and geospatial sciences. We will greatly enlarge our geographical range and expand our intellectual scope to include the components I will now describe. KMCP is a cultural heritage project to preserve vanishing traditional culture in a physical and virtual open access archive of recorded oral histories, songs, videos, writings, and artifacts. These artifacts will be curated in Kerala, and the virtual data will be conserved in multiple locations, including the Penn Museum. As time, technology, and globalization erase the memory of traditional life, we seek to preserve it for the benefit of future generations in Kerala and beyond. This is a collaboration with the communities and will include their voices of women, children, everyone. It's also a program to exchange scholars and students between India and the US for training and the development of course content that can be delivered virtually or in person. KMCP is an environmental project to document the impact of disruptions to the coastal environment in a broad sense to include natural disasters, human-induced climate change, damaging coastal engineering, and diminished marine resources. We will document these, but also consider social dislocation and change. We assess these responses to these challenges, including flight, resilience, restructuring, and activism. For example, one member of our team wrote a long report on the devastating 2018 floods in Kerala based on hundreds of interviews with affected families. This report examined responses and identified inadequacies and inequities in the actions of state and federal government. So we'll follow up with these same informants to learn their situation 5 years on. And KMCP is an ethno-archaeological project to explore Kerala in a cross-cultural comparative framework of maritime small worlds across space and time, where the ethnographic present offers insight into the archaeological past of coastal dwellers' economic and social network. Previous work has rarely called attention to the potential of Kerala to contribute to discussions of the longue durée in coastal archaeology. Already in the last few centuries BC, Sangam literature of Tamil Nadu bestowed upon coastal fishermen and salt harvesters a distinct identity. The Kerala case will be placed alongside ethnoarchaeological work I have done in fishing communities in Greece and Cyprus. And the comparative process is framed theoretically in terms of annal history, which will help to reconcile the contributions of long, medium, and short-term factors in the ethnographic present. Finally, although traditional knowledge now resides mainly in the oldest generation, we want the children to know about their past as they navigate an uncertain future. And we're very grateful to Penn Global for their generosity in supporting our work, as well as the others you see on the screen who helped in numerous ways. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you can all hear me. Is that working? Okay, so That's great. Thanks again. Thank you to our panelists for these really interesting and engaging presentations. I'm very excited about each of these 4 projects. And I'm going to kick off the Q&A with a question of my own for each of our panelists, and you can choose whether you want to take this on or not. It may be more appropriate for some presentations than others, but my question overall is really about the process of doing these projects and the partnerships that you each have had to form with, be it research institutions or implementing organizations. I'm curious to get your perspectives on what are the challenges you faced in forming deeper, equitable partnerships with your local partners, and what do you think it will take for these partnerships to really flourish over time? So, any order, Tarek, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I mean, I think in the case of this project, I don't think it would have been possible, even to the degree of our proposal, if we had not had significant ties with the local Department of Self-Government and director of local bodies. So our goal here is not to just go in and diagnose problems, but to diagnose problems in a collaborative manner. So we asked the Department of Director of Local Bodies, what are the things you want to know about these towns? One of the issues is that the data collection in these towns is so poor that those departments actually didn't know what was happening with budgets. We've been actually already sharing with them the budget data that we've been collecting and digitizing. And one of questions like, what happens with unspent funds? Turns out they didn't know. And so it's been useful for them to have those questions raised, and that created further buy-in. In terms of a challenge, though, I think right now it's all working well. We presented all the findings that we've had, but they face pressures of their own. I think the local government departments are very interested to hear what we find, but in a federal Indian structure, if we have certain kinds of findings that, even if we're very careful to say we're not ascribing any kind of motivation to it, are unpalatable, we're in an environment now in India where I think sensitivities to those are even greater. And so that's a concern I continue to have, because we honestly don't know what we're going to find. These are pretty uncertain spaces, as I said, so we have very weak trials on what we're going to find. Sure. And that remains a concern. I don't know who we continue.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to?
Well, I can say that my project would not even exist if it were not for CASI, because it turns out that my wife is a deputy director of CASI, Juliana DiGiustini, and so I meet all of the research fellows and the visiting scholars, and so it all started there with Sonal Mohan, who was here as a visiting scholar. And then it sort of, once we had this idea together, just sitting here at Penn talking about this crazy idea that we could do about comparative research. And then, once that happened and I visited Kerala, the tentacles started sort of expanding out. And we made alliances with the Kerala Council for Historical Research and so on and so forth. And UPIASI also has been a really important part of this. Anyway, so that has, and I think, once that's in place, the collaboration just kind of grow and continue to grow.
So it sounds like your collaborator coming here to Penn was instrumental in really forming this project.
Totally, yes.
Okay. So my project is in collaboration with JPAL and IFMR, and I would say it's actually founded in a much longer, long-term partnership. So I've worked with both of those organizations over the last 10 years, basically to found a lab that studies behavioral economics in India. And I fingers crossed, it's been a very low-stress relationship so far in those 10 years, and it's been absolutely wonderful. We could not do any of what we do in that lab without their support, and are just extremely grateful for that, and really look forward to kind of continuing in that relationship.
We are still at a very nascent stage in terms of forming partnerships, but something that we have realized very early on is two things. One is to get buy-in from local hospital systems, especially if you want to go to clinicians and approach clinicians and nurses. And number two was to have lots of video calls and understand from their perspective what the experience on the ground has been. Sure, we've done a lot of work in the US, but we can't really translate any of that without the cultural and domain expertise locally. So that those two things have been super helpful.
I see. Okay. So I have a few additional questions, but I want to also make sure that our audience members have a chance to ask questions. So we have about 4 minutes left, I see. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering about the urban practice, so that you're looking at civil society, relationships between government, civil society, all of that.
Sure. For Zoom, I think the question was from Jeannie that are we looking at civil society and the role of civil society in some of these smaller towns? I think we're open to finding that. I mean, in part of the reason that we've been, so I should say that, I focus on the expensive parts of the project, the survey work, the things that IIA is supporting, but we're going to predate that, prefigure that with, and we have ongoing qualitative work in a half dozen towns where we've had RAs for several months, and we've been trying to document some of the questions we might ask citizens based on that. What we're finding is that civil society, to the degree that it exists in these small spaces, has very little interaction with the government. So that to me itself is interesting, and we're going to scale up on the questions on the citizen survey. But some of it is to actually see, like, does quote-unquote civil society look the same way it does in either village India or big cities? And both of those are much more studied than this kind of missing middle. And so right now what we're finding is they're not very active in their relationship with the locally elected governments. But again, that could change and we could find out stuff on the largest data collection that suggests so. Thank you.
Yeah, Amy?
My question's for Charlotte. So do you anticipate that doing this kind of AI research on social media platforms that are trans-boundary, global in scope and scale, do you think you will see a diminishment or lessening of cultural differences around the kinds of impacts of misinformation, attitudes towards sex? Because I guess part of the question that a lot of the presentations today raised for me is this, the universal versus the particular. How much is specific to place and culture and context, and how much can be generalized across properties?
That's actually an excellent question. This is something we've been finding in two of our projects, one related to misinformation and also one related to mental health. And as you say, there are a lot of aspects that are generalizable, but I think the key in what we are trying to do is to find that heterogeneity and to address that heterogeneity. So for instance, concerns around misinformation, for instance, around say vaccines effect on pregnant women, that's something that has been seen in the US, in India, but in India we've also seen things that are targeted towards minority communities. For instance, vaccine has pork, so Muslims can't take them. So there are systematic campaigns that are very local. So something that is an advantage of tapping into these big social media platforms is you get at both the cultural and very specific insights or markers to misinformation.
Sure. Can I just ask a quick follow-up to that question, which is you presented some interesting data from the US and now you're looking at data from India. Can you comment on any similarities or differences in political partisanship or political identity and vaccine, both attitudes and vaccination behavior?
To be honest, I don't know how that pans out in India yet. Okay. In the US, we've seen a large divide, and that's very evident in how people write about and how people identify themselves in online as well. But in India, we've, for instance, seen that certain politicians also have these campaigns going on. So I don't know the exact answer, but there's definitely a political angle to it, and political orientation does play a role even in India.
Yeah, sorry. We have a recent graduate qualified programs who works on some of these issues and does find some partisan effects in disinformation and also user correction information. So happy to keep you in touch.
Awesome. Yeah.
That'd be great. Yeah. Okay, we take one more question. Yeah, there you go.
First part is about misinformation. So did you find that he finds more silver lining, COVID-related misinformation versus COVID-related, let's say, factual information? Which has more buy-in and more? So are you looking for that? That's one thing. And the second question which I have is related to the culture question, which is like you are using NLP, I can sense that. But are you also going to look into the native coding and are you going to have coders from different cultures? So that's my question.
Absolutely. So to answer the first question, it's very tricky what messages are considered persuasive. So for instance, you have persuasive messages in the misinformation and disinformation bucket, and also in the factual bucket. And something that we've seen that play a role is who the source of the carrier of the message. That plays a very big role. And we're also investigating if there are certain markers to how the messages are framed that influence persuasion. And to answer the second question, yes. So we are actually planning to just focus on 2 languages as of now, start with Hindi and English, even though NLP can deal with 15 to 16 languages, but that would be a very naive approach to go and say that, oh, we can solve all these languages at once. So we are actually going to recruit people locally to annotate messages and also identify types of misinformation in the local languages. And then the idea is to build models using the annotated data and then test them out of sample.
All right, so we are basically out of time. So I want to just take a minute to thank each of our panelists once more, and very much looking forward to the results from each of your projects over the coming year. Thanks again.
If I can have your attention, please, one last time for our 5th and final panel. I'd like to introduce my colleague Scott Moore, who will be our moderator for the 5th panel. If you are one of our presenters, we also ask you to join us on the stage.
I know, right? Yeah, you're one of the only people that can keep us under control. You say that now. On the stage all the time. See, for me, it's a rare experience. Even with the suit, though. All good. All right. Well, hello, everyone. We're in the home stretch before a well-earned reception and chance to socialize. But we do have a few more projects and very important ones indeed to highlight. So I'm really pleased to welcome our last few presenters, Dominic Vitiello from the Weitzman School of Design, Michael Weisberg of the School of Arts and Sciences, Xiaowen Chung also from the School of Arts and Sciences, and Tom Parsons from Penn Vet, or Veterinary School. Thanks to you all for joining us. And we'll go ahead and start with Dominic.
Thank you so much. Excellent, thanks. So I'm a city planner and a historian. This project is with my colleague Allison Lassiter, who's an environmental planner in our city planning department, and with my close colleague in Sicily, in Palermo, Ibra Cobena, who is the president of the elected Migrants City Council of Palermo. It's a not unique, but rather rare institution that again is elected by people who are not Italian citizens, by migrants who participate very much in this election, and it's proportionally representative of the migrant communities in Palermo, which is the 5th largest city in Italy and the capital of Sicily. This project will take place mainly in Palermo and in Catania, which is the other big city in Sicily, working with migrant-led associations. So a bit of background.
if you read the New York Times, and I'm going to assume most of us in this room don't follow the Italian news, but if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post, you may have noticed about 3 years ago this announcement that among articles about how the mafia is dead in Sicily, or almost dead, there's suddenly a sanctuary city movement in Italy. Italian mayors, led by, really, at first, Mayor Leo Luca Orlando in Palermo, start pushing back in ways that are in some ways very familiar to us in the United States, if you pay attention to sanctuary movements and sanctuary cities, pushing back against national directives to close Italian ports to migrant rescue ships, to close migrant reception centers, defund them, and to stop granting humanitarian residence permits to people who are illegally migrating to Italy. And he starts signing residence permits himself, followed by a number of other Italian mayors, creating greater sanctuary protections than we have here. This is essentially what I study in the United States, and I'm very much shifting my work to Italy, studying sanctuary cities. And I, as a historian, really define sanctuary much more broadly than most political scientists or folks who pay attention to the limited protections of sanctuary. For me, it's much, and for a lot of historians and anthropologists, sanctuary is a much broader set of protections and support that, to a great extent, civil society supports, right? But in Italy, one of the big challenges for migrant communities, right, and migrant community organizations or civil society is that they have very little access to resources and ability to grow their own institutions and leadership of community development work. Civil society led by Italians, some examples on the top, is much better resourced. And this is normal for countries that have more recently become immigrant nations than some other parts of the world like this country. So our project is really working with a set of migrant-led associations in Sicily. We'll start by really inventorying migrant-led community organizations and seeing which ones do work in their homelands, in sending regions and hometowns. As migrants around the world send more money back, both individually to their families and collectively together in collective community projects, then all of the development aid and development financing in the world combined, right? So migrants are really important actors in international, transnational development. But migrants in Sicily have a very, sort of just started to do this work and again, have limited access to resources to do it, right? So our project is all focused on building capacity, both initially doing inventory, studying who's doing what, trying to understand patterns of that, but also then interviewing people, members and leaders of associations doing transnational work in their homelands to understand their aims, the barriers they face, and the gaps there. And then we'll turn to a series of phases in this project that are much more about inviting particular associations that are ready to work with us on capacity building to do their work transnationally initially, but ultimately other parts of this work will support them in their local work in Sicily. And for me, this is part of future bigger research aiming to study the relationships between anti-mafia movements and what we would call immigrant rights movements in this country, to study sanctuary cities in Italy more broadly. And for my colleague Allison Lassiter, who's doing really important work in climate adaptation in the United States, but also in Africa and in the Mediterranean, we will be working largely with migrants from Africa, North and Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, maybe other groups too. But for her, this is a piece of much larger, really important and wonderful climate adaptation work. So thank you so much. And I'll see whom I turn the baton to.
Shall I just go, Scott?
You may. Proceed.
I will just go then. Hi, everybody. Thank you for spending your afternoon here. It's a beautiful day and the last day of classes, and you're here to hear about Galapagos, so I'll try to make it interesting. This is our friend, the mascot of all of our work in Galapagos here, the Galapagos sea lion, but this is not a project, many of you have heard me speak about him before. This is not about our friend, the Galapagos sea lion, but it's such a good picture, we have to use it in every talk. So this work that I'm going to talk to you about is work that is being sponsored this year by by Penn Global, but I just want to begin by acknowledging that Penn Global for many, many, many years now has been incredibly supportive of all of our work in Galapagos. I especially want to thank Amy for this, not just at the level of money, but also of thinking about how to actually go from something relatively small and that is spiraling out of control. Soon you will all be part of this project too. It will consume all of your lives as it has consumed mine, but I really appreciate Amy and your team so much. Support in every way through the years. So Galapagos, not sure what happened, but Galapagos is this amazing place. I would like to take all of you there who've not been there yet, because it has these incredible landscapes like this. This is San Cristobal Island, Darwin's first landing in Galapagos. This is on the East Coast, where the Beagle passed, and you're looking at the dry forest, which is a deciduous forest. So this is primarily Palo Santo trees you're looking at. And Galapagos is, of course, famous for landscapes like this. This is the sort of place that has inspired evolution, inspired the development of ecology, of different models of conserving national parks. But it's also a province of Ecuador, which is a kind of middle-income country, and one that, because of its equatorial latitude, will face very substantial effects of climate change. Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands are not going to face the kinds of challenges that a place like Maldives or Vanuatu or Kiribati faces. These are volcanic islands. They're not at the 1 meter sea level sort of situation where you start to think about Waterworld, if you remember this really not very good movie. But instead they face actually something that we're much more familiar with in a place like Philadelphia, which is they're going to face a lot of extreme storm events. This map, which is not very high resolution, what it's showing you is the expected frequency of what's today a 1 in 100 year storm at 2050 under kind of a high emission scenario. And what it's basically showing you is that all along the west coast of South America and into the Galapagos Islands, which are that kind of sort of green dots in the middle of the map, you're going to see a 1 in 100 year storm every 1 to 3 years. So that means take the worst storm you can possibly imagine. So if you're thinking about a storm that causes flooding in Philadelphia, think of our September, where the Schuylkill overflowed its banks, and imagine that every year. We probably face something like this too, but so does Galapagos. The problem is, what does that actually mean? Because if we're going to think about climate adaptation, which is that part of climate policy that has to do with facing up to the impacts of climate change and building a strategy of resilience like your colleague Alan Lassiter is going to do, we need to even begin by just understanding what this means down to the landscape scale, because that's the scale at which the impacts of climate change are going to be felt. And by the way, did I mention that for all of those famous parts of, many of you have heard me talk about this before, so all of those famous parts of Galapagos, the beautiful 97% of Galapagos that looks like this, we weren't allowed to have extra slides with people on them, but there are people that live in the other 3%, and they are the ones that are going to experience those storms. So this is a precipitation, doesn't matter. So now the IPCC says that, actually, no, sorry, this is from the Paris Agreement. You lied to me, Maddie. This is from the Paris Agreement. It says that adaptation actions should be based on and guided by the best available science and, as appropriate, traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems. This kind of thing is repeated ad nauseum, page after page, in Working Group 2 of the IPCC's 6th Assessment Report. I swear, every 5 or 6 pages, there's a mention of local knowledge and indigenous expertise, over and over and over again. Why isn't it there? Well, because the IPCC summarizes the existing literature. It doesn't do its own research. So if that knowledge exists, which I believe it does, local knowledge, indigenous expertise, that's essential for understanding the impacts of climate change and the adaptation solutions that are going to be required to face up to these, it has to somehow be gathered in a way that can be taken up by the international community, thought about seriously, built into Ecuador's National Adaptation Plan, part of the global discussion of the global goal on adaptation, and just be part of planning down at the landscape scale. So the project that Penn Global is going to support this year is to pilot one attempt to try to solve this problem. And it's really just part of this, but this is kind of the overall picture. So the way we imagine it is this. all of our projects involve partnering the local community with the technical expertise of the University of Pennsylvania. So the first thing we want to do is bring into equilibrium what the global circulation models and some of the downscaled models say and the local knowledge that people have. This will eventually then give way to work on adaptation planning, which will be done, again, in consultation with local communities and drawing on the expertise of our colleagues in the School of Design, and ultimately towards policy generation. But since I only have about 1 minute left, let me just focus on this first part, which is what we hope to accomplish this year. So as I said again, the models will tell us at most the kind of storm that we can expect, the kind of flooding we can expect, the kind of temperature we can expect, and how frequently we can expect it at a very aggregate coarse level. If we want to understand what that means down at the level that people experience it, we need to connect that to the kind of information that only the people who've experienced these things in the past have. So the project is really to do exactly that. It is to be in the community, as we all often are, and to work with local experts and to build up a core of local experts who can then spread out through the community, talk to people about their experiences of extreme storms, extreme temperatures, and so forth, and really build up at a kind of, we would say in Philly, block by block. That's not exactly relevant to Galapagos, but at a landscape scale, the exact risk profile of the city. And that's what we're going to try to do this year by, again, having the project, the Penn Global is supporting a postdoc, but we'll be having undergraduates and graduate students also really working with community members to train them to actually collect this information and then to build it up into something that can be captured, both captured by us for the further steps of our project, captured by the national government of Ecuador, and then captured by the global community for future plans. And we take it, if we can get this to work, this is exactly the thing that keeps getting called for in IPCC report after IPCC report, but really something that's not been effectively done, at least in the developing world. So that's what we're about. But this is one of many, many, many projects, many of which have been supported over the years. Again, thank you to Penn Global. And I really, some people describe me as a black hole that everybody falls into. Tom is one of the people that's fallen in, many people in the School of Design. So I really hope part of the point of this event was that we all begin to collaborate in the future. We work on conservation, we work in climate change, we work in health, we work in business, and we work in education. Love to talk to you all about this in the future. Thank you so much.
Right. Is it clear? Okay, all right. Good evening. Afternoon, not evening yet, everybody. So this project is titled Global Lives of Medicines, Materials, Market, and Healing Practices Across Asia. And I am the principal investigator along with my colleague in the History Department, Oscar Aguilera Mandujano. And we have a few collaborators, Yan Liu, Margaret Ng, and Yunju Chen, and some of our co-sponsors. We have this convening grant that we are going to bring 13 presenters together, each working on different parts of the project that I will explain. So Global Lives of Medicines is a collective project on the cross-cultural exchange of medicines and the ways in which global trade networks and local healing practices intertwine across Asia. We argued for a renewed attention to the roles that materiality and bodily practice play in the production and transmission of medical knowledge. So much of the research will challenge the decades of emphasis on European expansion and related influences on historical trade networks. So with the support of Penn Global Research Engagement Fund's Convening Award, we will bring together specialists in medical humanities, in historical and contemporary China, Japan, Korea, Central Asia, South Asia, as well as Southeast Asia. So together with, this is a map of trade networks in 13th century Eurasia. So together with 13 presenters, we will examine the complex history of camphor, which originated in the west coast of Sumatra and entered China in the 4th century through Iranian traders from Central Asia. Frankincense originated from the Arabian Peninsula coming to Southeast and East Asia through the Indian Ocean trade networks. It was associated with divine forces of purification. It also came to be used to alleviate traumatic childbirth pain. Agar wood, the most prized fragrant wood in medieval Japan, the access to which depended on inconsistent trade with the continent, with Asian continent, and evolved both invoking divinities and collaboration with Chinese monks. Realgar, it is an efficacious drug to expel demons in East Asian culture that came to be used for treating tapeworm infestations in medieval Japan. This is Atractylodus rhizome, or zhu in Chinese. It is a common medical ingredient in medieval as well as contemporary Chinese medicine. It was exported to Korea and Japan. As distinction between the two kinds of zhu that emerged in the 11th century tells a fascinating story about the rapidly changing market. Arsenic, categorized as poisonous in early Sanskrit medicine, while therapeutic in Sanskrit alchemy. It catalyzed transformations in both traditions at their encounter. Aconite, a toxic and potent medicine, perceived metaphorically in modern South Korea as an antidote to Japanese colonization and Western modernity. Red ginseng, you're probably familiar with, represents a major export item from South Korea, one of the largest national producers on the world market. The history of red ginseng in South Korea reflects the paradoxical effort to marry the language and rhetoric of tradition with the tools of an industrially regulated and cultivated item, primarily destined for export. This is what is called edible bird's nest, or yanguo in Chinese, is a quintessential item associated with luxurious Chinese dietetics. From early modern times till this day, it started as a curious maritime exotica from Southeast Asia in the 16th century. And we don't just work on medicines or luxurious supplements, but also ordinary foods or foods that seem ordinary to us now, including the history of daikon radish. In early modern Japan, was a testing ground for the fault line between foods and medicines in the transformation of Japanese pharmacology. Sugar, it was an embodiment of heat in Near Eastern humoral medical cosmology, entered Chinese pharmacology in the 7th century through the Silk Road. Tea, it was already introduced to the Ottoman Empire by early 18th century, but was not quite known at that time. Ottoman physicians wrote about tea as a new medical substance, and their approach reflected a larger transformation in medical discussions at that time. So this is our timeline. We'll have the conference here at Paraguay House in July, and we expect the publication of all the papers into an edited volume in 2014 or 24 or 25. Thank you very much.
Hi, so I'd like to first start by thanking Penn Global for the continued support of our international work at the veterinary school, and particularly to Amy and Scott and Chris and Allie, really for the partnership that they have brought to us beyond just the funding to help us realize some of these goals on these international projects. And today I'm going to talk to you about the application of certain technology to improve the sustainability of Chinese pig farmers. And I wanted to acknowledge our international collaborators, which would be Dr. Liu at the City University of Hong Kong and Dr. Zhu at South China Agricultural University. And so the background on this project here is that I think one of the generational challenges that we will face here in the next century is feeding the world. You can see from this graphic, it's predicted over the next 40 years we'll have to produce more food than we've made in the last 8,000 years. And in terms of focusing on China, there's this interesting graphic here, which if you draw a circle with a radius of about 1,000 1,000 miles, more or less roughly centered on Beijing, you can see that within that circle, more than half the people in the world today live within that circle. And for a veterinarian like me, who's interested in pigs, as I think you appreciate the importance that pork plays in the Chinese diet as well as its culture, it turns out that about half the pigs in the world also live, or more than half the pigs actually, live within that circle, mostly within China. And so if we're interested in having impact, particularly on sustainability of agriculture, and in my case, the swine industry, China is really an area where you need to be. And one of the reasons that we're interested in agriculture and sustainability is that it has a important contribution to the carbon footprint that we face. And so there's various estimates out there that probably a quarter of the greenhouse gases are coming from agriculture. And I think the thing that's probably underappreciated is actually the role that efficiency plays, agricultural efficiency plays in reducing the carbon footprint. And what we can see here in the US swine industry, over the last 50 years, we're now producing about 2.5 times the amount of pork, but doing so by reducing our carbon footprint by about 1/3. So we can't really underestimate that role of efficiency. And so really, what we're looking here is if we can use some of this advanced technology to continue to improve efficiency and then also have positive impacts on sustainability. So in the next slide, what I'm going to do is show you just an example of how we use computer vision. And this is a case where we're looking at actually a mother sow with her baby. So this is shortly after the piglets have been born, and it's maybe not quite as cute as a Galapagos sea lion, but what you can see here is we have identified each one of the individual pigs with a unique color, and so the kind of task here is trying to track these animals, and you can see they come together and then they will disappear behind objects, like you can see in the upper left-hand corner where a piglet disappears and then comes out the other side. And so the task is really to go ahead and track these animals over time. And then what you can see in this last video here, it's actually lunchtime, and so everyone's lining up at the dinner table here to be fed. And you can see then by studying the patterns of the tracking of these individual animals that you can start to identify specific behaviors. And so this just kind of reinforces it more from the perspective of a computer scientist. So the basic challenge here is what they call segmentation. So it's identifying specific objects within the image. Then we can track those images over time, and then by analyzing those that movement, get to specific behaviors. And then there's a host of things we can use in a management perspective from that computer analysis. So our deliverables here are really twofold. First is the application of and development of that system. And then what our hope is, and actually building on one of our previous CREF-supported projects, would be to go ahead and meet with key industry leaders in the Chinese pig farming world and go ahead and share our research advances, and then try to recruit farmers to do more kind of commercial scale testing of this technology. And I think there's a couple other kind of benefits that come out of this. It's going to create some unique training opportunities for students being able to move between the three partner institutions if the pandemic is permitting, but also I think it helps position both Penn Vet as well as the university in these kind of some unique and innovative spaces related to both food security as well as things related to sustainability and touching on all these issues that are important related to global climate change. And so with that, if there's anyone who's interested, we're certainly happy to engage. But thank you again for your patience and stamina.
So I'm just in awe, as I have been throughout the day. Oh, yes. So used to speaking loudly. I'm just in awe, as I have been throughout the day, of the breadth and depth of topics that these projects span. It's frankly why I love my job and love working at a university. It does, though, make for a little bit of a tough job as a moderator to try to find some common threads. But it did occur to me that there might be at least one. You can feel free to disagree with me if you wish. But it did occur to me that each of your projects had something to say, some implication for principles of justice with respect to your respective kind of topics and fields. So the question I'd like to pose to each of you is what implication you would sort of name from your work and your projects for principles of justice with respect to climate action, access to medicines, human movement, and animal welfare.
Sure, we can. Thank you, Scott. Excuse me. So when you think about, if we're going to focus on climate change and justice, typically you distinguish between, there's the kind of things we usually think about, which are obligations between countries, to future generations, things like that. But there's also, I think, a really important part of climate justice that is sometimes that's the parallel to democratic legitimacy. So when you're thinking about something like adaptation, not so much maybe in Galapagos, there people might have to like move a block, but in some islands, people might have to really radically upend their lives. And I think that in addition to engaging the community for epistemic reasons, because it's going to help may do science better, I think that engaging communities is actually a way of thinking seriously about the demand of justice to have actually recognition and inclusion, because you need, ultimately what kinds of actions are going to need to be taken have to be seen as legitimate by the community that they're in. So I think it's actually, I'm not going to say this solves the problem of climate justice, but I think that community-based participatory methods are intended to, not just enhance our epistemic capacity, but also to be very seriously addressing that kind of the need for participation. So of course we have you and I have lots to further things to say about this. The future paper that if we didn't have young children that we would write together, but I do think this is really important, and that thread definitely ran through all of the talks, I think. So I'll hand the mic.
So I guess one of the largest interventions that we want to make with this project is to really challenge, as I mentioned, this kind of very long impression that global trade networks kind of initiated since the European expansion, exploration of the rest of the world. And I mean, we're not the only people who are challenging that. It's being challenged by many historians, but so we're following that lead, and we are bringing more groups to pay more attention to the trade routes of medicinal materials across Asia. I want to show how complex this history has already been and how interconnected the world has been for a very, very long time, since 4th, 5th century all the way, and some of our collaborators work on contemporary times, and some of them work on from ancient medieval times. And I guess a second thing that we wanted to collectively kind of present is how many factors that we don't usually think about that shaped the development of medical knowledge. So we're using Asian history as an example, and how kind of materiality, accessibility of medicinals and bodily experience shaped and also are shaped by the formation and transmission of medical knowledge.
Great for sharing, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, this is a super softball question for me, right? My work.
You're welcome.
My work generally, and certainly this work in Italy is fundamentally about rights and justice, right? Among the many things I didn't talk about.
Mafia too, right?
Absolutely. Well, and
anti-mafia movements, right, becoming migrant solidarity movements is fundamentally about sort of different intersections of sort of vectors of justice or yeah. Thank you. I wasn't going to mention that, but absolutely, right. Mayor Orlando in Palermo, who's very much an ally and buddy of mine at this point, right, and is term limited and won't be mayor next, about a month or so, I think. We'll see what he does next. In 2015, at the sort of start of what Europeans call their migration crisis, issued a charter, the Charter of Palermo, right? Whenever you issue a charter, you're trying to say something to the world, right? That was arguing for mobility and migration as an inalienable human right, right? And I chose to work in Palermo both because I have personal connections there, particularly essentially from back to age 4 in anti-mafia movements, but also because I consider it really perhaps the leading sanctuary city in Europe, perhaps the leading sanctuary city in the world in some sense. That's a huge claim, but I think I'm reasonably qualified to make it to some extent. But finally, right, what you see in my project, right, is about promoting migrant leadership. And I mean, access to resources is one thing, right? But you brought up the term sovereignty, right, earlier. Control over one's own community's development, both in receiving communities where people settle, right, or are for a time, and in the places where people come from, right, to which they're still deeply connected and investing in everything from schools to health clinics to agricultural enterprises to community organizing and anti-trafficking work, which one of the organizations I profiled does. I can go on about this one. Thank you.
Well, I'd say if this was a softball for Dominic, it would probably be a brushback or a knockdown pitch for me. I was just thinking, Scott, as you're asking this question, and I think 35 years as an academic veterinarian, I don't think I've ever been asked to comment on justice. So, but there's a first time for everything, right? Especially being up here with such an astute panel. But I think two things. One, I think you could see from the pictures that the models of agriculture we're using are rather industrial. And I think in countries where there's a large degree of urbanization, there's really still a need for that kind of intensive agriculture, largely to go ahead and be able to provide affordable protein sources to people with limited needs. But then I think maybe the other interesting justice question that Scott was alluding to is then what do we owe to those animals that we put into those systems? And that's really one of the things that I didn't get a chance to develop in the talk here is can we also use these methods to help understand better the animal's experience and then get more insight into whether we're doing fairly by the animals within the system. So,
well, thank you so much. We're about at time, but are there perhaps one or two quick audience questions? Yes, sir.
Brought up the issue of stakeholder meeting. Stakeholders, there can be direct stakeholders, there can be indirect stakeholders, and there can be conflicts of interest which are more easily addressed and those that are not. Could you, I was asked the panel, did you encounter areas of conflict of interest which were elusive and difficult to resolve?
Thank you. And maybe I'll just invite if there's anybody in particular that wants to respond to the question about conflicts of interest. Yeah, so if I understood correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you were curious about conflicts of interest among different stakeholders involved in the...
How to resolve it if there was something particularly elusive.
Right.
After all, at the climate change, the UN Security Council is very divided.
Right,
That's
right.
why is there any right that can be told?
One country. Gotcha. I don't know if perhaps one or two panelists want to respond.
Say something if you want. I mean, I'll just say, this is a perennial problem, of course, that you can't, that if you think about, all of us are interested in actually capturing engaging with engaging beyond the traditional boundaries of academic research. I think that would be another thread running through all of our work. And of course, there's lots of great things that come from democratizing science, but also there's a lot of other voices and a lot of other interests. And so some of that is just really good, and it forces us to think about, where we're coming from. But there's also a kind of elite capture on the other side, which is, I'll just to give you an example from kind of climate spaces. All of these processes invite civil society to participate. But what does that actually mean? It means there are professional meeting goers. I mean, I'm looking at Gina. You know this really well. There are professional. You have a public discussion period. There's a series of people who are professional meeting goers. They often are in very well-funded NGOs and sort of say that. So there's that kind of thing to avoid. But then there's also, sometimes like legitimate conflict. So I represent in climate negotiations a small island developing state, and I mean, it's in their interest to make everything about development aid, even when that's not the topic. So I think that these are, exceedingly complex things, and a lot of it has to just be handled with kind of like openness and grace, because there's really nothing else you could do, I think, in these cases.
I'll just add two things. One is that I personally chose not to collaborate with people at the universities in Italy for a number of reasons, but most importantly, because to a great extent that means advantaging certain institutions that are Italian, that already have resources and that are good at at getting them, right, drawing them down. And so I think to some extent, right, this isn't a direct answer to parts of your question, but some of what we have to confront sometimes is who do we not want to work with, right? With whom do we ally, right? And the last thing I'll say is more about Penn Global. One thing I love about this research and engagement grant, right, is the range of things that you're funding, right? I imagine it's something we all appreciate in different ways, right? But for me, as a city planner in particular, right, I don't always find easily, grants through which I can really engage substantially on what I consider, equal terms, right, with community-based partners. It's something we struggle with tremendously in the School of Design in all our programs. But this is a sort of grant that asks. I mean, I think I ticked everything. Right? Certain, part of it. I'm doing all of this, and this grant is actually going to support me in all of this, and that's just wonderful. In addition to the wonderful staff that you have, right, Scott and Chris. So thank you again. I wanted to, say that sort of end of our panels, but.
Well, and I promise we didn't plant that, but it's since that's going to be hard to top. We better bring it to a close. I would like to you to all join me in 2 rounds of applause. First for our panelists. And second for my colleagues on the Global Initiatives team who made today happen. Hannah Malloy, Olivia D'Angelo, Ali Klauser, and especially Chris Kliniecki, who you all know very well at this point, all of whom made today possible. So thanks to you all, and we'll look forward to some socializing in a moment, just after our closing remarks, which will begin in just a moment here after the panel exits the stage. All right, switching hats for a second. Those of you who know me know that once I get on a stage and get a mic, I'm pretty loath to give it up. But I have one final task for today, which is to introduce Dr. Amy Gadsden to deliver a couple closing remarks. Amy needs no introduction to any of you here, but Amy has been at the forefront of all of Penn's global engagement initiatives, and especially our research and engagement funds, really almost from their inception. And as you all know, Amy is Associate Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, as well as Executive Director of Penn China Initiatives. And I always think it should not go without saying to a Penn alumna herself. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Amy Gadsden.
Hi, Tom just closed out his remarks by thanking everyone for their stamina. I feel like being the last speaker of the day, I'm testing your stamina further, but I'm going to be brief. So this has been a joyful afternoon for so many reasons. The last time we held our Research and Engagement Symposium was in January of 2020. We had a wonderful symposium here on China research and engagement. We actually had the Consul General here talking about the recent events that were unfolding in Wuhan. And of course, we all know what happened from there. So it is such a delight to be up here to close this out and to say that we're back. We're not just back in this room together. We are back in the world, and your discussions of your research today really demonstrate how we are coming roaring back into our efforts as a university to engage and to think meaningfully about the work we do around the world. 3 takeaways for everyone, both online and in the room, as you leave this program today. Penn Global is here for you. Penn is global, but you don't have to do that alone, right? You do your research, you do your work, but we are here to support and assist you. You've heard the names of a number of my colleagues today, but also Artemis Cook, who's in the room, Drew Cahan, Melissa Downey. These are all folks who behind the scenes are making it possible for us to do all this excellent research and activity. Also, too, your colleagues are here for you. I know one of the things that's most exciting about this symposium is getting the chance to meet other colleagues who are similarly engaged in questions in places around the world where there might be interesting intersections and overlap. I encourage you to draw on the expertise from across the university and follow up with people that you've met today. I can't tell you the number of folks who have come to us after these research symposia and said, I had no idea, I had a colleague in another school who was working in this area on this topic. We have developed a research project. I mean, it really does lend itself to growth and exciting projects in new and interesting directions. And finally, the third takeaway from today, the pandemic put up barriers between us, literally between us as neighbors, between us as citizens, between us as countries, but it underscored global interconnectedness in indisputable ways. And so as we move into a post-COVID world, we will be examining that interconnectedness and hopefully taking down those barriers. And so it's in that spirit that I wish you all the best of luck with your research and engagement projects, and we will look forward to reconvening here to hear how things are going. And that's where I will conclude. Stay tuned for more. Next year, Penn Global will celebrate its 10th anniversary. We will look forward to celebrating all of the ways in which Penn is global, and we will look to you to be part of that celebration and to lead that celebration. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not call out the wonderful work that Scott Moore has done. He was very gracious in acknowledging and thanking everybody else in the Global Initiatives team, which I was planning to do as well, Hannah, Allie, Olivia, and Chris. But Scott has done a magnificent job of not just putting this symposium together, but of course, all of the work that goes into running these funds and thinking about and conceptualizing and bringing the teams together to assess the projects and really drive the research in interesting and dynamic ways. So thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Allie, Olivia, and Hannah. We could not do this work without all of you. And thanks to everyone for your wonderful research projects. I look forward to meeting again next year and celebrating more. Please join us in the student lounge for a reception, and you can take your mask off.